Welcome in to Check the Mic. Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson. We're live on YouTube. Sam, we got a big one here today. Off-season grades for all 32 teams, and it's my favorite kind. It's not our grades, so we can't take any criticism.
Love it. Somebody else, several other people, in fact. So it's the perfect show, really. Number one, we are not responsible for putting the grades together. Number two, multiple other sources have as well. So we're being intellectually sound by going to multiple different sources, all those kinds of things. It's the perfect show. We can't get into trouble, and we're drawing from a wide variety of sources. And the camera is finally fixed, so we're all good.
Yeah, and hopefully all of our technical issues are fixed. Quick programming notes. We're going to be off next week. Happy 4th of July. Sam, you're closing in on citizenship here in America. So you're going to celebrate the country's birthday next week?
Yeah, well, I discovered recently that I am now eligible. Like once you've had the green card for 5 years, you can apply for citizenship. So yeah, I started filling in forms. Obviously, that's what you do. There's forms, many forms involved, filling them in. It's all good. The worst thing about it, though, is having to remember specific dates you did random inconsequential things 5 years ago. Like what exact dates were you out of the country for a week 5 years ago? Who the hell knows that?
Got to look it up. You got to know, man.
Find it in the passport.
Well, good luck with your forms and everything. So yeah, we're going to take next week off. The week after that, might have some pre-recorded content out there, but we'll be back. There'll be plenty of new videos dropping on the channel, and then be back live in about 2.5 weeks from here. But yeah, stick with us. Be sure you subscribe, and then we'll really start to ramp it up as training camp starts, previewing the entire season, getting into our studio, hopefully in late July. We are putting that all together right now, stitching it all together right now. The studio, the desk is in, some of the signage and everything. So you're going to be in there painting this weekend. It's going to be great.
Yeah, tomorrow I think I'm going to go in there painting. Couple more things I want to drop out there for people. Aaron in our Discord is wanting a little push for the fantasy leagues we got going there. We did them last year. They were a rousing success by all accounts. There's some prizes at the end. We'll give away some PFF or some Check the Mic merch.
Whoa!
Wow, that hasn't happened in a long time.
In the box,
we'll give away some Check the Mic merch.
That's a.
I don't think we're allowed to give away PFF merch anymore.
That's in the fine box right there.
Yeah. Anyway, there was a lot of good reports on the fantasy league, so they're going to open up some more. We're looking for there's 24 team leagues looking for players who'll be active all season, custom analytical scoring, so it's not just the sort of standard stuff. There's a focus on kind of analytical scoring system. So if you go to our Discord, you can find the link in the description here, and go to either #links or #announcements. You'll be able to find where the fantasy information is and sign up and have fun.
Do you know if we have any college fantasy leagues?
I do not know. Not to my knowledge.
I have a sudden urge to play college fantasy this year. Not NFL, but college. So maybe we start one of those in the Discord. I need like a nice free one, a nice simple one.
Yeah.
But I have a sudden urge to play a little college fantasy. Where's
nice. Well, you're no longer. Are you still in your expert league that you were in before?
No.
Right. So you got to spool up a new expert league where you.
No. My crowning achievement was taking 10 or 12 experts from around the industry and just, winning 4 out of 6 years and knocking them out. They all quit. That's how good I was. Anyway.
Last thing before we go. I have to do a bit of a mea culpa and apologize. We were talking through, and this is the thing that makes our show different, right? Is that we're willing to hold our hands up when we're wrong and say, you know what, that was bad. We're talking a lot on the air. Sometimes things come out of your mouth and you're like, you know what, that wasn't right. So we were talking about the performance of young quarterbacks right out of the gate, rookie quarterbacks. And I said that Roethlisberger's rookie season, as impressive as the wins were, he was bad that year. And you correctly, you pushed back and you said, no, he wasn't bad. That's too far. So I was like, all right, I'm going to go back and I'm going to watch some of these 2004 games. I'm going to go dive into Roethlisberger rookie tape and work out if I'd taken it too far. And I did. It was too far. He wasn't bad. He wasn't as good as the wins, and he wasn't even as good as some of the stats say he was. And there's a lot of bad decisions in there, as you would expect for a rookie. But he wasn't bad. That was definitely too far. Rookie Eli Manning was bad.
He was
Ben
bad.
Roethlisberger was just, he was reasonably good, average to good, and some of the bad decisions were bad. But I just wanted to put it out there. I took that too far. That was an incorrect, besmirchment of Ben Roethlisberger's character. And because I'm conscious now. I'm getting texts from Nick Wright about how close we're sailing to the Shouty Show wind, and I need to check myself.
I appreciate you for that. That's great. I love when you get into the early 2004, the 2004 film grind. I think that's great. That hits home. I appreciate that. What else to see from Big Ben?
When I was doing it, that I tweeted out, where the Steelers are running a play in the red zone. It's like split back formation. They do a little, in shotgun. They do a little toss to the guy on the right, who then immediately like shovel passes it forward to the other running back who's coming around. It was beautiful. And Ben Johnson, because Antoine Randall, the kind of wide receiver / trick play merchant for the Steelers back in the day, was the guy that did the quick pitch forward thing. He's on the Detroit Lions coaching staff, and they ran a very similar play last year with Ben Johnson. Obviously, Ben Johnson's going to get all the credit for it, but that, like, Randall ran that himself back in the day in Pittsburgh, and a very similar play was broken out by the Lions last year.
All the creative stuff, you could usually find some sort of roots or ties to it to 20, 25 years ago. So, no, that's fun. Appreciate that. And maybe we'll do a full deep dive into 2004 quarterbacks someday. Ben Roethlisberger, Eli Manning, and Phillip Rivers. See how they were early on. All right, we got a long show here, I believe. Let's try to keep it tight. We got 4 sources: PFF, Sports Illustrated, CBS Sports, and Bleacher Report. Those are the 4 sources. If you have any complaints, please direct them to any one of those 4 entities. It is not us. This is not Check the Mic. These are not our off-season grades. But new intern James, appreciate James here, putting all 4 of the grades together from all of those 4 sources, coming up with a GPA. So we'll be the composite off-season grade, right? So the CTM, Check the Mic off-season grade, is a composite of these 4 other sources. It's out of our hands, Sam. We really can't control this thing. But we're going to go down the line. And we'll go through the best and worst. There is some I completely disagree with, but that's probably for another 3 hours when we get toward the bottom. All right. You ready?
Yep.
The best offseason according to 4 seasons in the exclusive Check the Mic composite grade, New England Patriots. And by the way, when we were ranking the top 10 off seasons this offseason, I think the top 2 teams we had very much in our list. New England Patriots with the best offseason, A's and A pluses across the board for the Patriots, Sam.
I lost all form of sound for like 10 seconds there. What was that?
From me? I hope no one else did.
You're the only one that was talking, but that doesn't mean it wasn't. That doesn't mean it was you that went down.
So, good. Will didn't lose it. Patriots sitting near the top here, all A's and A pluses for them. Of course, they went all in on more defense and free agency, the Milton Williams, Carlton Davis signings, few others, and then the draft, which was pretty universally liked by most people. They went offense heavy in the draft, got Will Campbell, Travion Henderson, got Kyle Williams at wide receiver, and a couple guys in the late rounds that we liked as well. So Patriots, number 1 offseason with the 4.0 GPA.
Yeah. So, when I would factor in what a good offseason looks like, I would say it's a composite of everything, right? It's coaching moves, it's free agency, it's the draft, it's everything you did. And you can argue that the Patriots made massive improvements in every single area that they had access to. First thing, they cut bait on the Gerard Mayo thing, the anointed successor to Bill Belichick. Well, it didn't work year 1. Where do you go after that kind of experiment? I think a retread coach, but a guy with experience who was seen as someone that was consistently overachieving relative to the talent at his disposal in Mike Vrabel, I think makes a lot of sense. We can argue all day long about whether he's part of the Bill Belichick coaching tree or not, but somebody that was there when the Patriots were good. Let's put it that way, right? There's some institutional memory there. And then they went hard in free agency, not necessarily where people expected them to spend the money, but you don't necessarily have the choice when you're doing that. They tried to get Chris Godwin for a lot of money, and he took less money to go somewhere else. So to a degree, there's only so much you can do in those terms, right? All you can do is try and overpay for a guy. And if he still wants to go somewhere else, there's not much you can do about it. So they spent the money where the money was willing to be spent. Guys like Milton Williams. And then the draft, I think, was where everybody really liked what they did, assuming you're a fan of Will Campbell at left tackle. Theoretically, you can see upgrades everywhere for the Patriots.
Yeah, and as we've said 50 to 100 times this offseason, wide range of outcomes, I think, for New England. There's a chance that all of these offseason moves, or the majority of them, are pretty significant. And, guys like Stephon Diggs, right? If you get the best out of Stephon Diggs, Carlton Davis, Milton Williams, a couple of those rookies hit the ground running. Drake May takes a step forward in year 2. I still have the concerns about the offensive line, how much of an impact, say, Will Campbell, the center situation with Jared Wilson and Garrett Bradbury. We'll see how big of an impact that can have right away. But yeah, for a team, look, on this list, we made the point on our top offseason show list. A lot of the teams are the ones with rookie contract quarterbacks. They're just more capable of throwing money at people, getting into a bidding war for Milton Williams. I mean, if you're breaking down the value at $26 million plus per year, you wouldn't say, okay, it's the best value deal. But when you have the money to play with, you make those moves, and it puts you higher in these rankings. But we'll see what happens. So New England's number 1. The other team that made a lot of offseason splashes on the positive end comes in at number 2, and that's the Chicago Bears. Again, 2 teams picking 1 and 3 at quarterback 2 years ago, and A's and A pluses and A minuses across the board from all sources here. 3.93 GPA for the Bears. They revamped their offensive line. I think their draft was a little hit or miss as far as general perception around it, but getting Colston Loveland and Luther Burden with their first 2 picks, couple playmakers for Caleb Williams. I think the biggest one, though, Ben Johnson coming in as head coach. As you said, it's the totality of all the moves, and then really attacking the offensive line early in free agency and with trades.
Yeah. The Ben Johnson thing is huge. I think you start off with that, right? Like that's part of an off season for a team and a front office and an ownership is, okay, we need a new regime here, a new head coach. Who do we go get? Ben Johnson has been the prize for the last few years, and the Bears are the first team that's actually been able to prize him away from the Detroit Lions. For the last couple of years, he would have been a head coach, I think, if he was willing to do it. Teams were willing to or trying to get him to take that job, and he's been going back time after time. The Bears were the team that got him to say yes. So that I think is huge for Chicago. Obviously, we know it doesn't mean he'll be a good head coach, but right now you have to give them credit for achieving the thing that a lot of other teams have been trying to achieve for the past few years. They convinced Ben Johnson that they were the team that he was willing or happy to be the head coach of. I think the connection or the potential connection of him and Caleb Williams has to excite everybody as well. And then I think they did really good work rebuilding that offensive line immediately. Big question mark, and it's still a question mark because we don't know how much Caleb Williams influences that. But, they went out immediately and said, all right, we did good work last year putting some receiving weaponry around Caleb Williams. It didn't work. Now let's go really hard on the offensive line, make sure that he's got a good platform to work from. And then I love their draft. Look, Colston Loveland in the first round, dynamic talent, not necessarily one people thought was going to be going to Chicago. And then I think Luther Burden, following that in the second, has the potential to be an absolute steal if, he sort of keeps his head on and keeps focused. I mean, that guy's talent is unreal.
Yeah, so look, I think there's a reason why the Bears are this high. Getting Joe Thuney, getting the perceived top center in Drew Dahlman, that was just a great start. Added some defensive line depth as well. Grady Jarrett coming in after getting released from the Falcons. Both lines of scrimmage for the Bears, and then of course the coaching moves with Ben Johnson. So that's why they're up that high, Sam. Third team here, best to worst off seasons as we're ranking using our composite check the mic score. It's the Denver Broncos. Denver Broncos at 3.72 GPA. And look, I think Denver, there were some mixed reviews about their draft as well, especially even in Denver. Like when you get a running back, as high as they did with RJ Harvey, I think I'm the opposite of the public. When you make a perceived non-need draft pick like Jahdae Barron in the first round, I love it. I cheer for that. I think the fan base is kind of like, was that really the thing we needed? I thought we might go running back. I thought we might need a playmaker. And so sometimes that doesn't feel great, but I love the way they kicked it off, shoring up the defense even more. A defense that was fantastic last year, bringing in Hufanga to play safety and bringing in Drake Greenlaw, I think at a decent price. So yeah, we've raved about the Broncos at this point and their team building effort, and they're the third team sitting here with a rookie contract quarterback who are capable of spending a little bit more than other teams.
Yeah, I mean, I think they had a good offseason, and part of that is I really like RJ Harvey, for example. So I'm sort of higher on that as a draft pick than other people. Same with Jahdae Barron. Like, we really like that as a pick. Whereas other people might push back on those as, low position value or whatever it is. I think some of their offseason has been a little bit overhyped. Like, I think there's a lot of people that are still kind of living on the first few weeks of Talanoa Hufanga's NFL career, where he came in, like, hit the ground running, made a bunch of splash plays, and everyone's like, oh, wow, look at this guy. He's going to be, the next do-it-all safety who's a big hitter and a big play. And then, like, he hasn't been that guy really since that point. He certainly hasn't lived up to that initial, burst on the scene type of impact. And they're paying him quite a lot of money. Like, I'm not sure that's a great offseason signing, to be honest. I like Drake Greenlaw. Evan Engram, is fine. I think fills a need for them. But I think a lot of these grades gave them a lot for that free agency haul. I'm not sure it was that particularly good. I do like their draft, though, and I think that was underrated by people.
Yeah, I mean, we liked guys like Q Robinson from Alabama as a buy low edge, especially jumping into that Denver line where they're rolling 8 to 10 deep. So, yeah, I think it's a little overrated. I don't know if I'd put them third. I don't know who, like, off the top of my head, I have jumping them. Third felt high, but I get it. I mean, we've generally been positive. And look, my favorite thing about it is they got their safety, they got their linebacker, they got Evan Engram at tight end, so they didn't have to force anything. How many times were they mocked? A Tyler Warren, if he fell, or Colston Loveland in particular in the first round. First off, those guys wouldn't even have been there when Denver drafted. And then secondly, just filling that last need in the draft is not the best way to draft. So they signed Evan Engram ahead of time, so they didn't have to force a tight end. And then, they get a guy like Barron who's just a really good football player. So I get it. I like where the Broncos are, but maybe not third overall. Next team, number 4 overall, is the Buffalo Bills. And it's a different feeling offseason for them this year, isn't it, Sam? We got from B- all the way to A. And it's different because last year was their, quote, rebuild year. They got a little bit younger. He had a bunch of veterans walking out the door. And this year, it's like they went into the draft. I mean, this is how we judge these. How many needs do you have going into the draft? How many starting spots? Cornerback 2 was the biggest question going into the draft, and they draft Maxwell Hairston and others. And who knows, right? A couple of years ago, Kyer Elam and Christian Benford doubled up at corner. Benford, the 6th rounder, becomes the better player. They look deep on both sides of the ball here, Buffalo.
No, they do. And I Buffalo, for example, would be one team that I would immediately jump over Denver as having a better offseason overall, like in my opinion. I really like what they did. And honestly, I don't know how much credit you can give them for this in terms of like an offseason grade, but I was on a Bills radio thing, WGR, whatever it's called, yesterday. And I said, look, the thing that I give them the most credit for this offseason is not panicking, like not losing again in the playoffs and coming to the conclusion that we have to do something radically different. We got to blow it up. We got to make huge changes because clearly, we've reached a glass ceiling here that we can't smash through. I think that's the wrong interpretation of the results for the Bills over the last several years. I think the reality is they're a very good football team with a very good quarterback who has simply run into other very good football teams with very good quarterbacks in the last few games of the season and lost all of them, right? And in an ideal world, you would win half of those games, right? But it doesn't always go that way, and it doesn't take much for a coin flip to come up heads 4 times in a row. And so I give them a ton of credit for not doing anything crazy and saying, no, look, let's just keep knocking on the door we're going to lose Matt Collins. We're going to lose Amari Cooper, Von Miller, guys like that in this offseason. All we got to do is, replace those, restock, ideally upgrade on last year and go again. And that's what they've done, right? They bring in these guys, Joey Bosa, Josh Palmer. They bring in players like that, supplement the guys that left, and they didn't do anything crazy. And then I think they had a nice draft.
Yeah, the only thing I think Buffalo did that was somewhat reactionary, and, when the draft, I don't know how much of this is just a draft strategy and how much it falls. The only thing that seems reactionary is just loading up on depth on the defensive line and in the secondary. Loaded up on depth. And I don't even think that's like, oh, in the playoffs, we were banged up. We had injuries against the Chiefs each of the last 2 years when we lost. I don't think it's necessarily that reason. That's just generally good team building anyway. But if there has been an Achilles heel for Buffalo, it hasn't been the offense. It's been the defense. And it has been injuries, particularly 2 years ago when they rolled out there against Kansas City in the AFC Championship. And AFC divisional round. And had 5 backups in there, missing a lot of players. So loading up on the defensive line and then loading up on the secondary. I also just love the different body types that they added on the defensive line. We need a show where I just go through like all the things that tickle my fancy, Sam. All the little like soft spots that I have, like a good slot corner who could tackle, right? But different body types on the defensive line. When you have the undersized penetrator of TJ Sanders, the monster defensive tackle Deion Walker, the big long edge of Landon Jackson. I love when teams have different body type defensive linemen. What?
There's like an off-season project for like a super fan somewhere who puts together Steve's perfect 53-man roster that picks all of his like random little quirks, right? So it's going to have 17 speed merchant wide receivers. Okay. It's going to have every conceivable ridiculous body shape you can find on the defensive line. It's got to have Morgan Moses at right tackle. It's like all those things in the one roster.
First off, I think AI could do that well. Like listen to all of our previous episodes and construct who are Steve's favorite players. I think we definitely have the viewership and the listenership to pull that off, though. Like, there's definitely somebody out there who can construct the perfect 53-man roster. It would have like 10 quarterbacks. It'd be me drafting a million different QBs. It's like Zach Wilson, Anthony Richardson, buy low on everybody. All the speed guys.
And your entire coaching staff would be comprised of late 90s Jags players.
Yes. Brunell's calling plays. I love it. Tom Coughlin, bring him back as the dictator head coach. Be great. Off-season project for someone here. What is my perfect 53-man roster? Anyway, I like what the Bills have done, like where they are. Number 5 on the list is the Washington Commanders. They tied the Bills with a 3.46 GPA. So look, now we're at 5 teams here, Sam. The Bills are the only team that are paying for a quarterback on this list. And this is generally how it goes in the NFL. You're the Commanders. Now you've got Jaden Daniels. You just picked him number 2, just like the Texans last year went all in and got a Stephon Diggs and, got Danielle Hunter. Now the Commanders said, hey, we're going to get Laramie Tunsil. We're going to get Deebo Samuel. And they only drafted 5 times, but they spent their resources on veterans this offseason.
Don't you feel like that feels like something, if there's any signal in that, the fact that, most of these teams at the top are not paying a quarterback yet or a young quarterback, it feels like that's just like it's warping the off-season grades from these entities that are giving them out, because you can have a splashier free agency if you have money to spend, right? So, I'll give you an A for your free agency because you spent a lot of money. Meanwhile, the teams that have, high-paid quarterbacks are probably not throwing around a ton of money, so they're probably not going to get a really good free agency grade. So they're not going to have the overall, you know what I mean? Like this list is being warped by people being drawn to the shiny objects in free agency.
If you were doing this properly, and if you had the time to do this properly, which I don't think the good people at PFF, CBS, Bleacher Report, or Sports Illustrated have. You got to go in and say, here are the resources allocated to this is what the team is starting with. Here's their starting point. Here's what they ended up with. Now, if a team like New England or Chicago or the Commanders have all of these resources, and they came away with nothing, and you came out of this offseason like, man, they didn't really improve. They're sitting there with this, cheap quarterback, and they didn't add a ton, then that would be bad. So yeah, absolutely, it's being skewed. Whereas, teams like 7 out of the top 9 are not paying big money.
So
big
it's
money
interesting because there's a few like philosophical ways you can look at offseason, how to so George Barker in the chat says you can't grade absolutes on a curve. Teams got better or they didn't. I would argue for the purposes of NFL off seasons in a closed system with a salary cap, et cetera, I think that's very, very wrong. Like, I think you can be in a situation where you're heading into an off season inevitably going to lose a bunch of talent, right? Like, contracts are up, whatever. And maybe this is past mistakes catching up with you, but like, the point is, once we hit February, the most likely thing to happen to a team is for them to get markedly worse. If they're able to do significant damage limitation, I think you can say this team had a very good offseason, because the most likely thing for that team to happen by the time we get to May, June, July is for them to be notably worse than they were in February. If they're not, I think you can say they did a really good job this offseason of avoiding catastrophe. So I think each team is in a different situation heading into an offseason, and it's actually wrong to just say, well, who got the most better from the last year?
As far as the Commanders on this list here, I really liked the Laramie Tunsil move, because when we were debating every other team and what they were going to do at left tackle, the Patriots, the Titans, and all the money that they spent on Dan Moore, there was just not a lot of options at tackle generally, but particularly left tackle. And so getting creative, and look, you got to give up multiple draft picks for it. You only drafted 5 times this year, but I think you balance that with their volume drafting last year. You know me, I'd rather draft 10 to 12 times in a season. But if you're going to draft 5 times, make it after a year where whatever they brought in 10 or 11 last season. So hopefully next year they come back and draft 10 times again. And that's where you balance that out, say over a 2 and 3 year period. So going and finding a Laramie Tunsil, buying low, like a 5th rounder for Deebo Samuel, I make that move every day of the week, just like the Ravens stealing Anquan Bolden. I think that's my most famous one, the 4th rounder that they traded for Anquan Bolden, and he goes out there, he doesn't look old, and he's just a very good player for them for a 4. I think every year there's veterans available for 4s, 5s, and 6s who are worthwhile and still have it. And even if Deebo didn't look great last year relative to previous performance, like, it's not like he's 40. He could still be a really good weapon as a number 2 next to Terry McLaurin. Javon Kinlaw comes in. I like him as a pass rusher, maybe not as an every down defensive tackle, but and bringing back Bobby Wagner, by the way, the guy who could still play leader of that defense. So I like where Washington is.
Yeah, I mean, I like the moves they've made. I think they're low risk. I think doing that with some of your draft picks is smart business for a team that immediately got a quarterback and is like, oh, we can make some significant transformational changes now that we are comfortable in, rather than, well, let's keep the draft picks, let's draft a lot of guys, and they may, like, none of them may work out, and suddenly we just haven't built around our young quarterback. I really liked the Tunsil move at the time. I think I was at least spooked by the universal condemnation of Laramie Tunsil as like a locker room presence by all the Houston people. And look, I don't know if it's going to work out or not, but like, it's at least noteworthy that the Texans have a terrible offensive line and voluntarily, and in fact, like, happily traded away the best player from it to get him out of that locker room. Like that, there's something to that, right? Whether or not it will actually be a factor in Washington is up for debate, but I think it's at least worth acknowledging that as a thing. Deebo Samuel, I agree with you. Absolutely throw a draft pick at that, see what you can get out of him. Not a great start that he's rocked up to mini camps and stuff, vastly overweight, and is already like on the treadmill trying to get rid of that. That's not how you would want him to show up, but I agree. I think still the chances are that's a good thing. And then their draft kind of got pilloried, but I quite liked it.
But that's another one where the bias is when you only draft 5 times, it's tough to come away and be like, look at all the talent you added. But Josh Connolly, I don't know if he's ready to hit the ground running as a tackle right away, but I think by year 3, there's a chance he's, top 2 tackle in this draft. And then Trey Amos, I think, I really liked him, and in the positional value, I think fits there well because you got to see what happens with Marshawn Lattimore. You might need Amos earlier rather than later, but I think that was a nice second rounder.
Part of it is definitely that. I think part of it is also everyone assumed they were going to draft an edge rusher because it's still the area of biggest weakness on this team, and they didn't. And it's like anytime a draft does that, where it's like we have one clear glaring need and they don't draft anybody at that position, I think everyone immediately goes, well, that's like a C draft. Like, how can you possibly get a good grade from that draft?
I'm just laughing at JJ in the chat saying Debo needs lessons from Steve on getting back to his playing weight. I don't know what's happened over the last 6 months, but for some reason I'm down 20 pounds and the scale says the same thing it said during my playing days. So here we are.
You did make the point, though, that the body composition might be different. So I'm not sure your methodology is appropriate for Debo.
I didn't make the point. My wife made the point. She was like, you were a little more fit 15 years ago.
Well, you made it to me. I mean, you relayed the point.
I did. All right, we're 5 teams in. We'll be here until 5. Number 6 on the list is what are they? Las Vegas Raiders. My mind's just went Los Angeles, Oakland, and we landed on Vegas. I got there.
Get there eventually.
Nostalgia. Their GPA of 3.39. We've got a couple A minuses. CBS Sports. Was this Prisco doing CBS Sports with his little A-/A hedge move? That's such a Prisco move here. Old man Prisco. We should have him on the show. And Sports Illustrated gave them a C+. So wide range here from the Raiders. They landed 6, though, on the Check the Mic composite.
Yeah, SI hating. I don't really understand that. I don't see how you can.
Well,
I think the Raiders have had a really good offseason. I don't really understand how you could. I mean, it's not like they hate it, but a C+ is pretty average.
According to producer Will, it was multiple people on CBS's YouTube, so they gave out multiple grades. So that's what it was. So I apologize to Pete. Should not.
That doesn't mean it wasn't him throwing in the hate.
No, I mean he's just a general hater. I think the Raiders one depends on what your appetite is for winning this year versus the future. Because way back when we were fixing every team in 5 minutes, some of our favorite shows, I said, forget this year, punt, look to 2026, get Spy Tech, give them a couple draft classes, and like rebuild this whole thing from scratch. And then 3 days later, they traded for Geno Smith. And so if you're saying how good are you going to be in the future, let's compete with the Chiefs, Chargers, and Broncos in 26 and beyond, they said, well, we can actually compete right now. So if you're saying, hey, how did these moves affect 2025? Absolutely. This was a great offseason for the Raiders because they went from no quarterback to Geno Smith, who I think by every measure is at least a top 12 to 15 quarterback, if not better, over the last few years. And so you got better at that position. They had one of the most intriguing drafts as far as various playmakers and Ashton Genty and big-bodied receivers and possession receivers. And then they brought in Pete Carroll. So if we're going to add the coach aspect of this, Pete Carroll, vibe-changing move here with the Raiders. I guess my only criticism would be, did you just like creep back toward average, right? Did you just become an 8 or 9 win team? Or did you actually lay the foundation for, hey, we actually want to win this division and overtake the Chiefs 2 and 3 years from now? Did you slow that process or did you enhance that process? I think that's TBD, but I think you definitely got better for this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think they got hugely better for this year. And I don't see that they've necessarily derailed their ability for in a couple of years' time. I mean, it's always what the alternative was. Like, the problem with the Raiders is for the last couple of years now, it's a different regime. So you can say, well, we wiped the slate clean, but I don't think it necessarily works that way. Like fans don't immediately wipe the slate clean. So the problem is they haven't been able to find a quarterback for the last few years. They've been the team that's had no quarterback when the music has stopped for multiple drafts now. And if you look at this one, the league essentially determined this was a 1 quarterback draft, and that quarterback was going number 1 overall. So even though the Raiders are picking reasonably high again, you could make the argument they didn't have a shot at a quarterback this year. So if that was your read of this whole landscape, you can say, well, can we really go again with no quarterback and let's focus on next year and hope next year there's a guy available? Like, how far can you just punt on quarterback before you have to do something? I think Geno Smith makes you an immediate, competitive football team in every given week, essentially. Obviously, he's not as good as Patrick Mahomes, and he's probably, he might be the fourth best quarterback in the division, third or fourth anyway. But he's a massive step forward over what they've had the last couple of years. Like, he immediately makes them completely competitive again, and then they kind of reinforce that by using that draft pick on a guy like Ashton Genty, and now all of a sudden you might have a really intriguing football team. And sure, maybe it's capped, like maybe it can't be a contender, a real Super Bowl contender with that quarterback or with that group. But I think it's a better option than let's hope that next year a quarterback shows up that we have a shot at. Like, I just don't, that doesn't feel like a plan to me. That's like that. Well, you'd love to be able to rush the passer with 4 guys. Well, sure, but that's not a strategy. Like, I don't think endlessly hoping next year there's a guy that falls into your lap is the way to go.
Then you have, so Geno Smith comes in, you have Chip Kelly coming in to call the plays. And don't forget, over a decade ago, when Chip Kelly came to the Eagles, that offense was unstoppable for about a year and a half. That was, Nick Foles, 2013, incredible season. He had Mark Sanchez playing the best football of his career. There was a point where Chip Kelly's offense took the league by storm. Then it kind of got stale. It's completely different now. So it's his second chance in the NFL. He had 1 year in San Francisco that didn't go well either, but second chance in the NFL as a completely revamped offensive coordinator, plus Pete Carroll. And Spytek was also right there building the Bucs, who go into the season. I was like, man, there's some continuity, and you're not ranking Baker Mayfield as a top 5 quarterback, but everything around him looks pretty good. And so if that ends up what the Raiders look like, if that's what the Raiders look like 2 and 3 years from now, it's like, hey, I don't think Geno Smith's going toe-to-toe with Patrick Mahomes or even maybe Justin Herbert, but the rest of the roster is in really good shape. And if that's the strategy here, that's fine too. But yeah, they look better. They definitely look better and more competitive this year than they were the last couple. Next up is you ready?
Mm-hmm.
New York Giants are up next, 3.29 for the Giants. This is an interesting one because I do think the roster's on the upswing, but with a very difficult schedule, are we going to actually feel it? Their range is from B- all the way up to an A. Another team that is blessed with the first contract quarterback, so they could make some moves. I think they shored up the secondary. We just pre-recorded some rankings of the best units in the NFL. Maybe their defensive line gets a little bit of love now because they have Dexter Lawrence. They added Abdul Carter in there. So Giants getting some love this offseason.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's a weird one because, your starting quarterbacks are Russell Wilson, and then maybe the second guy is Jameis Winston, and then you've got Jackson Dart. So it's all about how you feel, I think, about the quarterbacks. It's not going to feel great starting Russell Wilson after the last few years of his career, basically since he left Seattle. But I think obviously he's a bridge at this point. Like, he's the guy that's been brought in and was brought in to just guarantee something while they figure out what the quarterback solution was going to be. And then it ends up being passing on one at the top of the draft, coming back in, getting Jackson Dart. So, if Jackson Dart ends up being the guy, and if they manage that transition well, right? If they go from Russell Wilson to Jackson Dart, and maybe there's a Jameis stint in the middle, but it all goes reasonably smoothly, then I think you say, look, this has been good process, right? They found a way of guaranteeing baseline play. They had the discipline to go after the blue chip player, Abdul Carter, at the top of the draft, and then come back in, get their quarterback anyway. Like, if they made the right personnel decision in that Jackson Dart can be the guy, and they manage his sort of succession well, then you say this has been a fantastic offseason for the Giants. If that just goes wrong somehow, right? Either they rush him in and he's garbage, or basically if he's garbage in any capacity, they rush him in and he stinks, or if they sit him on the bench for ages and when he finally goes in, he stinks. Either way, it's been bad.
Yeah, because I'm old and wise now, Sam, I am way too smart to say I don't like this quarterback, therefore I don't like the move. Right? I am more, let's evaluate the process. I don't think they gave up a ton to trade up and get Jackson Dart.
I think their process, their process this entire offseason at the quarterback position has been good. They brought in Russell Wilson to guarantee like a minimum level of play. I think Jameis Winston for like an absolute steal, like no money whatsoever, is good process, even if they eventually then because when they made those sort of moves, it's like, oh, hang on, what are they doing at quarterback now? This makes no sense. Jameis Winston can be the third quarterback in your depth chart for like nothing, and he's a borderline capable starter. Like that's fantastic process. And then the Jackson Dart approach in the draft, I think, was good, whether or not he becomes the guy. So start to finish, I think they've done a good job at quarterback this offseason.
And they're setting me up for my job next year. I think they've done a nice job adding a nucleus for my GM job next year. You're also a best story guy. Like you're rooting for the best story. Imagine you're sitting there, in the room with the Giants. It's like, what if we had Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston in the same QB room? What if we had both? What if we had those two trying to out-motivate each other in the team? Let's see what happens. And we're going to draft somebody. I mean, that's a perfect world for the story.
We need the Netflix quarterback show, right? That's the new season's coming out soon. Next season needs to be just the Giants quarterback room. Like it's quarterback, but it's just following all three of those guys constantly.
So the Giants are up next. Let's go next up. I think it's 8th here. Carolina Panthers are next, just behind the Giants. GPA of 3.25. They range from a C- on CBS Sports all the way up to an A. I'm curious. I mean, listen, I don't know why CBS had them so low. I don't know why you would sour that much on the Panthers offseason, but another team, third year of Bryce Young, so they have resources. My guess is the only criticism would be they didn't get Milton Williams. They were supposed to be the biggest player there. They got outbid for him. Yeah. Tried to replace him with 3 instead of 1. They brought in some bodies on the defensive line. Or maybe if you hated their draft, but I thought their draft was good. Draft process was good. Tetero and McMillan, then the 2 edge rushers. I kind of liked the Panthers offseason. I don't know if I'd put it top 6 or 7, but they're 8th here. I think it's a good spot.
Yeah, I think they had a good offseason. I think to get it that low, to call it a C-, you would have to be like the only thing they needed to do was massively upgrade the defensive line, and they didn't manage to do it with like the star players that we wanted, right? So like you said, they missed out on the Milton Williams sweepstakes for a few million, right? They had to pivot and go to substandard players or subpar players relative to Milton Williams because they weren't willing to pay a few more $1 million. And then I think you could make the same argument if you wanted to about their draft, right? They went with Tetero McMillan instead of the edge rusher that was sitting there that everyone assumed they were going to get in the first place. And they came back around in the draft with Nick Scorton and Princely Umanmielen. And you only need to look at last year's Atlanta Falcons to see that sometimes that just doesn't work, right? And you didn't take a guy at the top of the draft, and the guys you tried to backfill with in the later rounds just aren't as good. So I think that's the view of it that gets you to a C-, but I would disagree with that, I think.
Will tells us this is Logan Ryan's grade here for CBS. But yeah, and look, they re-signed J.C. Horn for a massive contract. They brought in Trayvon Merrick. I think like the Commanders, like the Patriots, like the Bears, there's a lot of money thrown around at veteran players on rosters that needed help or at position units that needed help. For New England, defense, offensive line. For the Bears, offensive line, defensive line. They're throwing a lot of veterans for a lot of money at this thing to get it better. The Panthers had one of the worst defenses in the NFL last year, one of the worst pass rushes. The offense came alive last year, but it also coincided with Bryce Young throwing to, wide receiver 4 types, undrafted free agents, Jalen Coker, David Moore, and they had Tetero and McMillan. So, yeah, I think overall they're moving in the right direction. As I always say, though, sometimes it might feel good in the offseason, but because the foundation was so weak, you might not – doesn't mean they're going to be a 12-win team, just like the teams that didn't do as much, their foundation was so strong. Doesn't matter that they didn't do as much. They're still going to be better. But, yeah, I think the Panthers are moving in the right direction for sure.
I mean, it's still entirely plausible that defensive line is bad next year, and that would be problematic. But I think they've at least offset that by the fact that maybe their single biggest move in the entire offseason has been getting theoretically the number 1 wide receiver in the draft or one of the top wide receivers in the draft to give to Bryce Young, who remains the most important player, for the entire franchise. So, even in the most critical view of this, I think you could say still their biggest move should help their most important player.
For fear of going on my own little rant here, producer Will informs us that Logan Ryan's low grade is because, I assume this is true, he's penalizing Teteroa McMillan for saying that he doesn't watch film. The quote was, I don't ever need to watch it by myself because we go over it as a receiver group. So that's part of Logan Ryan's criticism. I just don't like, really quick, the media world. Like you're going to make a determination about a player, about a quote, which is either in context or out of context, much like the Caleb Williams quote, which was like, oh, he never watched film. No one taught him how to watch film, which he clarified weeks later. Because people run with it. It's like, oh, this guy doesn't even watch film. No one's taught him how to play football. This is ridiculous. So Teteroa McMillan doesn't watch film. That's the quote. And then other people are going to drag him down because of this either in or out of context quote here.
Yeah. So it was a video that came out I think it was from McMillan's own Instagram at some point, but it was one from like his freshman season or something where like, so it was an old video that resurfaced at like draft time or, in and around the draft period, of him saying that like he didn't watch film by himself, but no one seemed to figure out, well, okay, but how does he feel about it now? Like, cause I potentially that's scary, but if it was a thing that was true when he was 18 and no longer true, it's not scary to me. So it's my problem with those things is not like the thing itself is ridiculous. It's that no one has gone to no one's done the hard work of actually finding out the relevant thing. The relevant thing is not like nobody cares if Teteroa McMillan liked or did not like watching film by himself when he was 18 years old. That to me is irrelevant to his modern capacity. Whether he does it now, I think is relevant. And someone needs to find that out before we know whether or not to care about this.
That's my issue, is that when soundbite reactions, when you quote dunk on people based off a soundbite, without digging into the context, without like you just said, that was from 3 years ago. He's 3 years older. Anyway, Panthers offseason in the top 10.
So to sum up, that's a bad reason to give them a C-.
That's what I'm trying to say. That's a bad reason. Logan Ryan. Sorry, Logan. Next up's the Baltimore Ravens. So now you've got all these first contract quarterback teams and then the Bills and the Ravens making their good offseason moves, ranging from a B to an A-. I don't know if this included Jair Alexander, but
no,
I mean, the most intriguing move, I can't imagine it would. But the most intriguing move to me is the way they, in the draft, got Malachi Starks late first, a safety that was talked about going, higher, just get the good football player. Second time in 4 years that they've drafted a safety who's a perceived good football player. Kyle Hamilton, now Starks. And then they get Mike Green in the second. And look, is that he falls mostly because of off-field concerns, but he does have a chance to be one of the biggest steals of the draft. And then they sprinkle in guys like DeAndre Hopkins and Chidobe Awuzie and now Jair Alexander, the buy low, once good veteran where if you hit on one or two of those guys, they make a big impact.
Yeah, and I would also give them, I don't know if any of these have, but I would give them credit for re-signing Ronnie Stanley. Like he was a prospective free agent. They could have lost their starting left tackle. The market would have given him an absolute boatload of money based off the contracts that were getting signed for lesser players at left tackle. The Ravens kept him in the building. They kept him away from free agency. They kept one of their own. So I think that's impressive work from them just to keep him around and lock him up, and an important move for them. Generally, the rest of their sort of free agent moves were not spectacular, but that one was important. DeAndre Hopkins is an interesting addition to them, given where he is in his career at this point. Like it's not transformative, but it's an interesting name to add to that receiving core. And then, their draft is pretty fascinating. Like you said, there's a ton of data that says that stopping the slide of guys that fall relative to the consensus board is good business generally. Now, with Mike Green, we know there's a reason why he was sliding, right? It's an off-field thing. It's not his tape, right? Nobody was looking at Mike Green's tape and being like, man, it feels like a second rounder to me. This is somebody that had like top half of the first round tape, but there were enough concerns that teams let him fall as far as they did. But the data says that's smart business, right? The data says that has a better chance of working out than other guys that you could pick at that spot. And if it hits, I mean, that's one of the best value spots in the entire draft for them.
No, it is. I think the Ravens, because they've built up enough cachet. Eric DaCosta as GM, really smart front office overall. They've built up enough cachet that I think most people don't criticize their moves. So I think that probably influences the grades, right? Like when they traded for Roquan Smith and then paid him at the time, I think it was a record contract or close to it for linebackers. Yeah. At the time, everybody was like, linebackers are overrated, don't pay them. And then the Ravens did it. It's like, man, the Ravens know something, man. They know something. What are they doing? They're ahead of the game. They're bobbing when everyone else is weaving. Like, they know it, right? They get the benefit of the doubt. So I don't know if it's like a top 10 offseason, because I'm starting with, like, it starts with a high baseline. Like, they made some pretty good moves. It's fine. It's a good offseason. But I'm actually surprised. Usually to be high on these rankings, you need flashier moves, is my point. And I don't think any of these things are flashy. They're just good Ravens business moves. And they're probably getting the Ravens bump in the grading because they've historically been pretty sharp as far as team building goes. All right, next up's the Los Angeles Rams. They have some shiny moves that I thought might bump them up a little bit higher. Because like the Devontae Adams addition, bringing him in at wide receiver, that has a chance to make a massive impact, even at his age. When you talk about you already have a Puka Nacua, you add a Devontae Adams, that's one of the most important moves of the offseason because a wide receiver can absolutely move the needle. And he doesn't have to be 2020 Devontae Adams. If he's just a high-end wide receiver too, which I think he's more than capable of being right now, this has a chance to be one of the best moves of the offseason. The Rams just bringing in Devontae Adams. Yeah,
and I think, because the Jets thing didn't work for anybody involved last year, it sort of feels like everyone is tainted from that now. Like it didn't work. Therefore, everybody is worse than people thought they were, right? Rodgers is done. Adams is done. Garrett Wilson isn't the player that people thought he was going to be. Like his ceiling is lower. Like just everything about it. It's poisoned the opinion on everybody. But actually, if you watch Adams last year, he was really good once he got going. Like he can still play. So, and the first thing Sean McVay does when they get him in the building is like put up his film to the meeting room. And it's like, look at this dude. He's still amazing. I think people are sleeping on how good Adams still is and how much of an impact he can make alongside Puka Nacua in that offense with Matthew Stafford. I think it's a potentially huge move. I would give them the same credit as I gave the Ravens for retaining one of their own. They kept Alaric Jackson at left tackle. He would have been another one of those, big losses in free agency, a gaping hole then at left tackle that they would have needed to fix. And of course, remember, go right back to the start of the whole offseason. They figured whatever it was out with Matthew Stafford, right? The talk heading into the offseason is they might trade him away. They might blow this whole thing up and, start over. And I feel like that was just a contractual ploy by everybody involved. But whatever it was, they figured it out, right? They found the middle ground on Stafford's contract. They got it sorted out. And now everybody's good again. And the Rams go into this season as a real Super Bowl contender, as opposed to a team that's just started a rebuild project.
The other aspect of their offseason is they have a first-round pick for next year. So they added that as well with their trade out of the first round. So you're right to mention very early in this offseason, we had no idea, like, if they were going to still have Matthew Stafford or if they were going to be in the Sam Darnold sweepstakes. Like, we didn't know. So retaining Stafford, adding a Devontae Adams, and adding a first-rounder next year. I thought their draft was fine because they didn't have a first-round pick. I don't think it's going to look as good. I think they're a little bit higher on tight end Terrence Ferguson maybe than I am in the second round. I like Josiah Stewart in the third. They've got a pretty good history of drafting, so we'll see how that all plays out. But they got to feel pretty good about this balancing act of Stafford and Devontae for this year to go make a run, but also having the luxury of having 2 first-round picks next year. So all of that is part of this Rams offseason and why they ranked so high here. Next up's the Tampa Bay Bucks. And look, the biggest thing there is we kept talking about their draft as, hitting the drive in the middle of the fairway and bringing in some really good football players. They range from a C+ to an A-. And I think because of some of the turnover with the Eagles, the Lions, some of the best teams in the NFC, the 49ers, the powerhouses of the NFC over the last couple of years have, I think, more question marks than the Bucks have this year. Where the Bucks, it's like they're retaining a lot and adding a bunch of good football players in the draft. Emeka Egbuka, Benjamin Morrison, David Walker, Elijah Roberts, Tez Johnson, all draft picks that we kind of liked along the way here.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like their entire offseason was just about steady. Like, let's just do steady, small, positive EV moves every step of the way. Little increments. Let's just keep getting better or not worse. And let's just piece it all together one step at a time. Chris Godwin, they re-signed him. The Patriots were willing to give him more money. He wanted to come back to Tampa Bay. You kept a guy, a good player in the building, albeit one coming off a significant injury again. You re-sign Levante David again for one more re-up. Like, that's always a good move. The guy's still a good player. You bring in Hassan Reddick as a 1-year flyer off the back of a career that's kind of gone awry, but it still has talent. Like, you watch the end of his time with the Jets, when he knew he was out of there by the end of it, that dude can still rush the passer. That's theoretically a great low risk, high upside move. And then their draft felt like almost until the end, like it was just about bringing in good football players that maybe they have a ceiling and maybe they're limited in how good they can be. Like, can Ibuka be a number one superstar? I don't think so, but he's almost certainly a very good number 2 receiver. You bring in him, Benjamin Morrison, a sort of similar thing. Like, does he have elite number 1 corner talent? Maybe not, but will he be a good caliber starting cornerback for you? I would say probably. So just a good, solid offseason all the way along.
Yeah, if you go back to the start of the offseason where Chris Godwin was a free agent and he took the hometown discount to come back, I know he's coming off the injury, but the wide receiver room had questions at the beginning, and you retained Chris Godwin and added Ibuka, and now you're sitting there with, I think, one of the deepest wide receiver rooms in the entire NFL. And then you just look up and down the roster. It's like, man, we've drafted and developed most of our starters. That's the thing Jason Light gets most credit for, and they retained the necessary players, added the buy low on Hassan. I mean, it's a decent amount of money for Reddick, but it's a 1-year deal as a pass rusher that I think fills a need for them. So yeah, I think they're in good shape and have done a nice job this offseason. I think this is a good spot for the Bucs. One team I thought would be higher. So the Bucs are at 11. Number 12 is the Vikings. And when we talk about splashy moves, or when you shore up position groups of need, usually you get higher grades. So they're 12th here. Maybe it's just because they only had a handful of draft picks, but the way they attacked the offensive and defensive lines this offseason, I thought would give the Vikings a better grade. And I can't imagine most people grading were like, man, you really missed out by not bringing back Sam Darnold. I think they made the expected move there, letting Sam Darnold walk, rolling with J.J. McCarthy, and then taking the extra resources, shoring up the interior of the offensive line and the interior of the defensive line. I think they made all the right moves here. I'm surprised the Vikings aren't actually in the top 8.
I mean, I think definitely the draft, people did not love Minnesota's draft overall. So I think that's gonna harm their grade. I do think the Darnold thing affects their grade. I don't think people are going, well, that was a catastrophe. I do think people would factor that in and say, well, they lost Sam Darnold, who played really well last year. How good a free agency period can it be if you're losing a starting caliber quarterback and we don't know what we're replacing it with in terms of how good J.J. McCarthy is going to be. I do agree, though, overall, it was a good offseason. I mean, the Darnold thing, I think, was understandable in any direction, right? Like, you could understand the argument of he played so well for so much of last season. Let's try and work out a deal. Let's get him locked up to some kind of middle-class quarterback contract. You can also understand that the last 2 weeks were so disastrous that you just couldn't re-up him anymore. You had to walk away and use that money and give it to J.J. McCarthy and blah, blah, blah. So I think, in my opinion, either way, I'm fine with that decision. It's just it's a tough call they had to make, and they did. Then taking that money and rebuilding the offensive line completely, I think, is smart. Like, that line got wrecked in critical games. It needed to be improved, and they went hard at it. And made a couple of other little additions as well. Not even little additions, a couple of other major additions in the defensive tackles, and Jonathan Allen, Javon Hargrave. Those could have huge impacts as well. And then, yeah, look, their draft is unspectacular, but the most important pick is the top one, with Donovan Jackson, who theoretically completes the overhaul of the offensive line.
Yeah, I say this over and over again. Very rarely will you draft 4 or 5 times like the Vikings and Commanders did, and people are going to love your draft. That's just not going to happen. The teams that draft 11 and 12 times are going to have more players that people like in the draft community, and they're going to like those drafts better. I think the Vikings made a lot of the proper moves this offseason, just like they did the last couple off seasons. I don't think it's funny because Kwesi been positioned as this analytics GM. And if you said, what's the biggest impact he's made? It has been by far with veteran additions, whether it's trades, TJ Hawkinson, whether it's free agency, Van Ginkel, Grenard. By far, it's been veteran additions and not the draft whatsoever, right? They brought in drafted Jordan Addison. What else have they gotten in the draft over the last few years? It's not much. And they've actually given up a lot of draft picks along the way here to get those veterans. So it's just an interesting dynamic. I think whatever models he's applying have worked much better at projecting NFL players to that roster versus the draft. And they they haven't drafted a ton in addition to that.
Yeah.
And now I can't wait to see what Will Fries, Ryan Kelly, Jonathan Allen, Javon Hargrave, if he hits again, right? If Kwesi hits again, if the Vikings hit again with those offseason additions, it's a really good roster. If 3 out of those 4 players are nice additions for the Vikings here this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, they have not gotten much out of the draft in the last few years. Obviously, J.J. McCarthy is a big question mark at this point. We don't know either way. Dallas Turner didn't make an impact year 1 at all. That draft didn't do much. The draft before is the Jordan Addison draft, third rounder, second pick. Mekhi Blackmon looks like a good player, but tore his ACL. So that's another significant question mark as well. And they're obviously Kwesi's first draft, like the top of that was a disaster, right? Lewis Seen, whether or not he'd have been a good player is tough to know because he had that devastating injury very early on, but he didn't. I mean, he was already outperformed at the start of his career, to get to that point. So the early signs weren't good. And Andrew Booth Jr., cornerback, was terrible. So not been a good draft history from Kwesi so far, but he's made up for it with veteran moves and free agents and all the other things.
So the Vikings are at 12. Again, I'm surprised by this. They're the last team with a GPA over 3, by the way. And I thought they'd be higher. Another team that's at 13th that I thought would be higher is the Arizona Cardinals. I think the Arizona Cardinals have had an outstanding offseason. Their grades across the 4 sources ranged from C+ to B+. Now, I think they have one of the biggest boomer bust drafts because of their top 2 picks with Walter Nolan, with Will Johnson. Stylistically, Walter Nolan, maybe some boomer bust. Injury-wise with Will Johnson, even stylistically too. Turnover machine, some boomer bust there. But for a team that we've criticized a ton for the talent level in the trenches or on the defensive side of the ball the last couple of years, they attacked that properly this offseason. And again, I think the Cardinals have done a great job. I thought they would have ranked closer to the top 6, 7, or 8 on these rankings, but they come in at 13.
Yeah, I don't understand how you don't like the Cardinals draft or Cardinals offseason a lot. I struggle not to even to say it's average. I think is harsh relative to what they've done. Josh Sweat, Dalvin Tomlinson. These are significant moves for a defensive line that needed to get better and has gotten a lot better. I think their draft was fantastic. I mean, even if you are a little bit leery on the likes of Walter Nolan and Will Johnson for boomer bust potential, like where they got them was good value in both instances. Middle of the first round for Nolan, second for Will Johnson. Like I didn't love Will Johnson as a corner, but the middle of the second round, absolutely. Like that's great value at that point. Jordan Birch from Oregon, in the third, again, didn't love him as a player, but like that physical tool set in the middle of the third round is great value. So yeah, I think the Cardinals have had a great offseason. I can only surmise that the reason the grade is not higher is that people have correctly penalized them for letting Dennis the Barbarian Gardeck walk.
Yes, that's the biggest loss. It is the biggest loss of any team.
2 biggest losses. They let Dennis the Barbarian Gardeck walk, and the great Wolfie, or whatever his name is, the dude that sounds like Jesse the Body Ventura announcer, is retired. So they 2 huge losses. It's
just not going to be the same. We'll talk about this in August, I'm sure. But week 1 of the preseason, I enjoy nothing more than watching the local Cardinals broadcast, getting Jesse the Body, breaking it all down with his Cardinal colored glasses. I mean, it is going to be sad. Maybe they'll bring him back just for the preseason for us, but yeah, he is retired. It'd be good.
It's especially because I forget about it every year. So the first thing I know about it is like randomly stumbling on a Cardinals preseason game, and then the guy announcing it sounds like Jesse the Body. I'm like, yes, again, forgot, but this is great.
And then you hope he starts calling the Barbarian, and you're like, oh, this is WrestleMania 6. It's the Barbarian and the Warlord, and Jesse the Body's commentating. So it's just not going to be the same without him. Tough losses for the Cardinals. But yeah, I mean, adding Josh Sweat, Calais Campbell, going back to that exercise, who's on Steve's 53 every year? You can add Calais Campbell to that right now. The dude can still play, even in his late 30s. Adding Dalvin Tomlinson. So I think they just loaded up on the defensive line properly, added a high-end playmaker in Will Johnson in the secondary. I really liked this Cardinals offseason. Some boomer bust to it, the way that stylistically the players that they got. But I mean, I think these are the right moves, man. I like where the Cardinals are.
Calais Campbell is 38 years old, and you can argue he's a better player now than when he left the Cardinals back in whatever that was, late 20s.
I agree. All right, so here is there some bias with this one? 14th is the Eagles, 2.92 GPA, Philadelphia Eagles. You're defending Super Bowl champions. Usually in these rankings, the team that loses some big name players and doesn't replace them does not get a good grade. But there's dead smack in the middle here at 2.92. The Eagles. I'm surprised that they're this high. I think they would normally rank a little bit lower. Is Howie Roseman just getting the benefit of the doubt here? By the way, I'm not saying he shouldn't. I'm judging the rankers here, not so much what the Eagles did.
Yeah, okay. So part of it, I think, again, it's that what was expected to happen heading into the offseason and what did you actually achieve? So I think everyone expected them to deliberately let some of these guys walk precisely because they have in-house replacements ready-made, right? Like Moro Ojomo ready to step in, take those Milton Williams snaps. They've got guys ready to take the snaps of a Josh Sweat on the edge. They also did re-sign Zach Bond. That was one of the potential, big losses in the offseason that they were dealing with. So I think part of it is expectation. Like they were supposed to and prepared to let the guys walk that they let walk. But yeah, I think you can at least look at it and say, it's not like they added, stuff a ton in free agency. They bits and pieces, but we're not looking at this and saying, well, they lost these 3 or 4 critical players. They brought in 3 or 4 critical players. Like, no, we lost a couple of significant players. There's a couple guys in-house ready, but those are losses. We did keep Zach Baum, but it's not like we added, a significant player. But I do think you can look at their draft and say, that was another pretty solid piece of work. And I think they're being given credit for effectively having the succession plans in place for these spots.
And remember, early in the offseason, Howie was kind of like warning Eagles fans, like, hey, might not be able to keep everybody. We're going to get a little bit younger. And they're set up for the future as far as draft capital goes. They drafted in volume this year as well. I think the Zach Bond re-signing was absolutely huge. I mean, if we go back through the last 4 or 5 years, Sam, Zach Bond's free agent signing, that's one of the most significant signings in the NFL of the last 4 or 5 years. He really was, as far as the impact he had on the defense, what he had done previously as a role player, and the ability to identify him as a playmaker and a game changer in that Eagles defense. That was really significant. So bringing Bond back was great. I don't know if people love their draft this year versus previous years. I think it was clearer in other years where it's like, man, you stole Jalen Carter and you stole this guy and you stole that guy. I think it was a good, fine draft, but I don't know if it has the same perception as previous years for the Eagles. But Jihad Campbell at linebacker. Yeah, Campbell was good. Makuba as a safety in the second round. They've got some high upside plays on day 3. Again, it's fine, but certainly more going out than coming in, I think, for the Eagles this year. A big part of it, though, is the youth movement. And it's like the Bills last year. It's like the Chiefs 3 years ago, where you just got veterans going out the door and you're trusting youth but that usually doesn't translate to a high offseason GPA. But I think, like the Ravens, people are given the established good front office the benefit of the doubt here. Great. Eagles are 14th. Jacksonville Jaguars come in at 15th at 2.9. Thoughts on the Jags?
Yeah.
With Liam Cohen coming in as head coach.
So that's the first thing you got to focus on is they've gone a different direction, found a new head coach. Okay, it started rough with his Duval, butchery, but let's assume that he can grow beyond that, right? Let's assume that's his Nick Sirianni moment of problematic opening press conference, right? And then we grow, then we get better, and we go to work with the important stuff.
I'm not going to judge him by the way he said Duval. Certainly not. Travis Hunt. I mean, the biggest move here is the Travis Hunter one. So the fact that they are here. So the Browns are much lower on this list. There's going to be some teams lower on this list that I don't think should be there. The fact that the Jags are this high and the Browns are this low on the list. People must have really liked the trade up for Travis Hunter and didn't like the trade down for Mason Graham picking up the extra first round pick. Like I liked the move for both teams. I get it from both sides. But if which team do you think has more chance of regretting that move? Is it the Browns passing on Travis Hunter, but having the first round pick next year where they really might need a quarterback? Or is it the Jags a year from now saying, oh man, Travis Hunter is not the same type of player that we expected. Really wish we had an extra first round pick. I don't think the Browns are going to regret the move. No. I don't know that the Jags will either, but I don't know that, you know what I mean? I don't think the Jags need this much more credit than the Browns got for trading down.
No, I don't know if it is all that, but because you look at their offseason as a whole, new regime, regime change, and they needed one in Jacksonville given their recent history there. So bump for a regime change. Okay, as we said, the Duval thing was rough, but Liam Cohen I think is a good head coach signing, good head coach appointment. Particularly for Trevor Lawrence as well, who remains the most important player on the roster. Overall, they've made a few tinkering, small, solid additions in free agency, veteran stuff. They didn't lose, massive, significant pieces, I think. Christian Kirk, who had kind of worked his way out of that lineup anyway. Evan Engram is definitely a blow, but they can replace that. And then the draft. And the draft is going to come down to that sort of referendum on what exactly Travis Hunter can be. Is he just a really good player at one position? Is he some sort of once in a lifetime super freak that can actually play two ways and upgrade two different positions at the same time?
So, yeah, I think Jags being in the middle, I think it's fine. They threw a lot at low value type of free agents. And the Travis Hunter move, I think, is going to be the most significant one. Let's go Kansas City Chiefs next. They are dead smack in the middle at 16 this offseason. This is an interesting one because depending on where you start, I think it changes things. If you start with the fact that they had Joe Thuney under contract and then traded him, but their grades range from 2B minuses, 2Bs from the four sources here, 2.85 GPA. When you start with the fact that they had Joe Thuney, traded him, that's a tough loss. I mean, you're losing one of the best guards in the NFL, certainly one of the best pass protecting guards. But I think their process in replacing him, buy low on Jalen Moore, getting Josh Simmons late in the first, I think we both enjoyed this Chiefs draft quite a bit as far as the value that they got up and down. So I think if you start with Thuney, it doesn't feel as great. But what they did after that in replacing a bunch of the players that they had to let walk or trade, I think they did a pretty nice job.
So this is why I don't think you can just look at additions and subtractions and calculate it as like a mathematical formula of what did you get better or worse when you're grading an offseason. Because I think the whole point about it is what position are you in at the point where you enter that offseason and what can you do about it, right? So if you were looking at it as just additions and subtractions, you would say you had Joe Thuney, arguably the best guard in the NFL. You no longer have Joe Thuney, arguably the best guard in the NFL. Ergo, you had a bad, offseason, right? But Kansas City was in this position where Tooney at his age, wanting more money, with Trey Smith also younger and wanting his, due his contract. Like, they were in a position where they were going to have to invest a lot in the offensive line again, and in a closed system with salary cap restrictions, et cetera, and they made the decision that the best way of doing that is to trade away Tooney, get a draft pick for him now while you can, not invest in him, use that money to keep Trey Smith, who, remember, most people expected to actually hit the open market because Kansas City couldn't afford to keep him. They found a way of keeping him. It cost them Joe Tooney, but they got a draft pick back in the process. I think you look at that and say that is good process and a smart way of approaching like a tricky, challenging situation that they were facing heading into the offseason. I think it would be a bad way of looking at that to just say, well, the net of that is probably a slight step backwards, therefore it's bad.
Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to project the Chiefs, once we're doing win projections or whatever, I think it's a fair process to say, well, they're a little bit worse than last year, and oh, by the way, it looks like the Chargers, Broncos, and Raiders may have gotten better. That's fair. But if you're judging how the Chiefs situation that they walked into, like you're saying, they had several free agents and several decisions to make on both sides of the ball, and I think they came out in a pretty good spot on both of them. I think just bringing back Marquise Brown on the cheap, I think, is a really nice move for the Chiefs. In addition to the draft picks, Noel Williams at corner, brought in some playmakers. Man, I think I really liked their draft, and I think they have a chance. Yeah. They had another chance to get younger and replace some of those veterans that they needed to let walk.
Oh, I love their draft. Like, arguably my favorite draft. Every single player up and down, I think, is a good pick for them. But also, so you can look at the Tooney and Trey Smith move as kind of one thing. They also, given the question mark they had at left tackle and given the options available when we talked about Baltimore re-signing Ronnie Stanley, the Rams re-signing Alaric Jackson, like the options very quickly disappeared at left tackle. And yet Kansas City came out of this with Jalen Moore with a sort of low sample size, a pretty good play for, reasonable money when you consider what other people started signing for. And then, insulating that with Josh Simmons pick in the draft as well, who's incredibly talented, but coming off a serious knee injury. Like, that's not a bad roll of the dice to try and fix the most important position on your offensive line. Like, again, relative to expectations, like what were your alternative options if we're in February, coming off the Super Bowl, and you're in this position, you're all right, what is the best Kansas City can possibly end up with at left tackle come May, June? And then you say, well, it would be Ronnie Stanley or something. Well, no, Ronnie Stanley and Alaric Jackson are off the table. What's the best you can do? You're not going to end up with a much better option than what they ended up doing. So again, it's all relative to what were your options.
For the listener or viewer building my 53-man roster as well, the Jalen Moore
injured
players. Yes, fine. Jason Verrett.
Everybody has to be coming off an ACL injury.
Somebody in the chat said that was a Greg Rosenthal bit for a bit, that he would sign all the injured ACL. Greg and I think alike. But also the buy low year 4 or 5 offensive linemen, stack the roster with those guys. That's Jalen Moore. That's the Jalen Moore move. The more I thought of it, I'm like, that's something I would do. Grab hope for the year 5 real breakout, advancement from an offensive tackle in particular. And the Chiefs did that with Jalen Moore while also hedging with the Josh Simmons pick. So I think that was good process. The next few teams here, Sam, like, they're all dead smack in the middle. Like, these are your average GPAs. So you're not going to get, I don't think, significant results either way. But the Jets are 17th at 2.84. The biggest thing was like, hey, they moved on from Aaron Rodgers. So their grades ranked, from a C to an A minus. They moved on from Aaron Rodgers. That was part of the decision making here. But also, 33rd team came in there, found Darren Muji, helped them find Aaron Glenn, helped the GM search, the head coach search. That's a big part of this Jets offseason.
Yeah, so you immediately, the first and smartest thing they did was obviously hire the 33rd team to help with their whole search, right? And no stone was left unturned. Again, good process, right? Let's talk to everybody.
There was a stone left unturned. When I texted Mike T where do I send my resume?
Hmm.
And he clapped back, as the kids would say, with LOL. Said LOL. He laughed in my face via text message.
I don't know that was a stone left unturned as much as just it was turned from a distance, like the stone was turned over, determined to have nothing of consequence beneath it and moved on from.
Well, they'll regret it when I'm with the Giants a year from now.
Right.
Making all the right moves.
But anyway, we give them credit we give them the credit for the regime change and the process involved in the regime change. Aaron Glenn comes in as the head coach. Decision one is, what do you do with, Aaron Rodgers? Do you re-up it for one more year, see if we can do it? Or do you just say, look, enough of this, pull the Band-Aid off, go in a different direction? I think getting away from that was the right move, right? It didn't work out. I think it was a good call. It was a good gamble to take. And the gamble didn't work. Came up snake eyes. So get away from it. Let it be somebody else's problem. It's Pittsburgh's issue now. Go in a different direction. The Fields as a solution, a quarterback is an interesting move. I get it. I don't hate it. I don't love it. But that's a big part of their offseason.
Yeah, we said this a bunch at the time, the Justin Fields move. It's like, of all the options you're given, and this is how decisions are made. You're sitting there, it's like, all right, what are we going to do at quarterback? Here's all the available options. It includes drafting one. It includes bringing Sam Darnold back to the Jets. That was never going to happen. Like, there weren't many options.
Right.
The halfway house of, like, we're not going to spend a ton of money, but, we'll give Justin Fields a shot. We'll be competitive this year. I think he'll make them, somewhat competitive this year. You kind of hope he figures it out, but you're not out of the running next year. If you loved a quarterback at 7, you could have taken him, and no one else in the league loved a quarterback in the top half of the first round besides Cam Ward. So you probably made the right move to go offensive tackle again with Armand Membu. So, yeah, given where they were and coming off of a go-for-it Aaron Rodgers couple years, I think they did a pretty nice job to reset. But you're also not sitting there being like, man, they're completely set up for the future because of all these moves they made. So it's dead smack in the middle. Makes sense to me.
Yeah, I get it.
Falcons are 18th. Now they make aggressive moves. A lot of aggressive moves for the Falcons. PFF has A-, CBS Sports all the way down at C. So they're ranging from C to A-. To love the Falcons offseason, you essentially have to love the draft. You have to love that they came away with Jalen Walker and James Pierce with both of their first rounders. Don't have a first rounder next year. I don't know who did the PFF grades. It probably wasn't Trevor, though, because he didn't love Jalen Walker. They get him in the middle of the first round. So thoughts on the Falcons being at 2.83 GPA, 18th best here in the composite?
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of fascinating. And it does make sense they would have a bit of a range based off the unconventional approach they're taking to seemingly everything they do over the last few years. They were relatively quiet in terms of free agency. They bring in Leonard Floyd. That's a fine, solid addition to a defensive rotation, which they desperately needed an influx of talent into. But it really, they lost a couple of players as well. Grady Jarrett. Made sense to let him walk, given what Chicago was willing to pay for him, and given the sort of decline he's been on the last couple of years. Matthew Judon hadn't made the impact they wanted him to make when they traded for him. Justin Simmons, that one's a little bit more, questionable or at least risky. But it's all the draft, and that this just unique, wild approach of like, we'll get Jalen Walker and then we'll come back in for James Pierce. I mean, it's a hell of a gamble, but it's almost such a weird, like such an atypical, unorthodox approach that I want to give it credit, even if I hate it, just for the radicalness.
I love it so much. Again, for the second straight year, probably the most aggressive moves in the draft, the greatest case studies, and not just the fact that they have Jalen Walker and James Pierce, but they have the 3 defensive linemen that they drafted last year, rounds 2, 3, and 4. So you're talking 5 legitimate young defensive linemen for a team that really needed an influx of youth and talent on the defensive line. So this is another one I think that can go both ways, right? Like if 3 out of those 5 guys hit, all of a sudden the Falcons are fierce up front. If they don't hit, then they have one of the worst pass rushes in the NFL again. and they have to get creative on the defensive side of the ball. But there's a chance, Raheem Morris and that defense, they've got some really nice pieces to move that thing forward while most of the offense returns intact, right? Most of this offseason was defense-centric because their offense was coming back other than Drew Dahlman at center. So they're intact on offense, have Michael Penix Jr., had to make some aggressive moves on the defensive side of the ball, and they did it.
Yeah, and Xavier Watts in the third round is a potentially significant consequential pick as well, given that they let Justin Simmons go. He could come in, he could be starting sooner rather than later. So that, I think, is a big part of it. Somebody in the chat mentioned, where was it? Kirk Cousins, defensive. Kirk Cousins still being on the roster feels like a failed offseason for the Falcons. Again, I think relative to like the situation you were in, I think that was always the inevitable outcome, right? It was too painful to cut him, and nobody would want to take on that contract. So I think the most likely outcome was for him to just have to suck it up and be there still. And that's just the way it's gone. So it's not ideal. Like when you bench your starting quarterback and you go to the other guy, you kind of want to weigh away from that guy. But I think the reality of the situation was always, this is the most likely outcome for them.
There was a point where I believed, like, remember a few years ago when the Colts traded for Carson Wentz, but then they ended up trading him away and getting something in return. There was a point where I felt like taking the shot on the veteran quarterback isn't the worst thing in the world, because there'll always be someone desperate enough to take him off your hands. So in that sense, it's not wild for the Falcons, other than I think they ran into an offseason where there was no one to take him off your hands. The musical chairs were over. There weren't a ton of teams with massive draft needs. A year ago, 6 teams drafted first-round quarterbacks. Usually that's where the needs come in. There just wasn't a lot of options for Kirk Cousins. And it's that part's tough to predict. I'm not saying, and again, I'm not saying the Falcons were signing Kirk Cousins with the idea of, we'll just trade him in a year. But the time when they wanted to trade him, there just weren't a lot of starting options. And so they couldn't get something in return.
I mean, I'm not going to penalize them for not being able to find a mark that was willing to take on the sucker deal. You know what I mean? Like, there's nothing they can do about that.
But if they had, then that offseason bumps up. If they stole a 3rd or 4th round pick for Kirk Cousins, then that would have bumped them up. But they're 18th on this list. Number 19 is the Dallas Cowboys. They're at a 2.7. I honestly think they would have been like 28th if they didn't make the George Pickens deal. Don't you think?
Sure. Yeah.
Because for the second straight offseason, like, the Cowboys go in cycles. They've had a couple off seasons where I loved what they did. It felt like they shored up their needs properly. The year that they brought in Brandon Cooks and Stephon Gilmore, I thought that was excellent process. And then other times they didn't fill those needs. You and I both liked their draft, particularly after round 1, some of the players they got in rounds 2, 3, 4. So I thought that was good. But yeah, it's another offseason of, I think there's more going out than coming in until they made the George Pickens move and brought him in to be wide receiver 2 next to CeeDee Lamb. Yeah,
I mean, so again, I remain consistent that I think you have to give them credit for re-signing Odighizuwa rather than let him hit free agency. I think that looked even better once Milton Williams did hit the market and got the contract that he got. It was sort of, wow, he's getting paid a lot of money, but then wait till you see what the other guy's about to get before you criticize it. So keeping him in the house, I think was a good move. Give him credit for that. But otherwise, yeah, it's not a lot of movement in free agency. They've been saying for a while they don't like doing that. And I mean, I disagree with that approach, and that's why I would not grade them particularly well, because I think they do need to do some work and didn't. But that's the approach they took. The draft is interesting because you're right. Outside of their first round pick, quite a good draft. But the first round pick is, I think, one of the worst first round picks process wise, or just, when I say that, there is absolutely a chance that Tyler Booker, defies expectations and is an outlier and is an exception and is a great pick, right? But the most likely thing to happen, I think, is for that not to be the case. So when you say bad pick, that's what I mean. It's like, I think that's a low percentage chance of, it's a bad bet to make, right? the bet may come off. It may pay you out, but I don't think it's a good bet to make. It's not a good gamble to take.
Yeah, when you say that at 12, I mean, I think there's a lot of people that liked the Tyler Booker pick, certainly more than we would, because he'll plug and play, he'll be a starter and what have you. I think it's more about what you leave on the table. Reminder, Jerry Jones came out and said they were heavily debating Walter Nolan versus Tyler Booker at that spot. Walter Nolan, of course, goes 4 picks later to the Arizona Cardinals. That'll be a fun one to look back on, especially if Dallas's defensive line doesn't continue to get better, right? Odigizua coming back. I agree. That was huge. They couldn't afford to lose, I don't think, him and DeMarcus Lawrence in the same offseason and try to reshape that line next to Micah Parsons. I liked rounds 2 and 3, Ezeraku and Chavon Revel. And so, yeah, I think the draft could go either way for Dallas, but it's another offseason of people wanted a running back in there. They bring in Javonte Williams, Miles Sanders. They're trying to stitch it together, which is funny because it's like the analytically sound move to kind of neglect the position and take the retreads and builds the line instead. But the run game has been a weakness for Dallas when they've needed to run the ball the last couple of years. So they probably haven't shorted up where they need to. Maybe they have. But yeah, dead smack in the middle makes sense. But honestly, if they didn't make the George Pickens trade and they're sitting there with a massive question mark at wide receiver 2 next to CeeDee Lamb, you're talking about them ranking probably in the bottom 3, I would guess, in the composite here.
Yeah, I would say this is a bad offseason, but for the Pickens deal. Also, by the way, we forgot the pickup of Joe Milton. I mean, that's a move where, all joking aside, it makes a ton of sense from Dallas's point of view. Like, it's all upside. Milton, in albeit one game, effectively, showed stupid upside, right? And obviously, he already has the crazy cannon for an arm and the super athleticism, et cetera, et cetera. Like, he does have a ridiculously high ceiling, albeit based off a very low sample size of play. So why would any team in the NFL not want to roll the dice on that? Like, yeah, let's get that guy in the building. Let's see. I have no earthly idea why the Patriots were willing to do that deal, but from Dallas's perspective, it's a genuinely good move.
Yeah, I like that. We're not even saying that it's going to pay off.
Right.
Process-wise, get him in the building. Why not? Why wouldn't you take that shot? So the Cowboys are at 19. A couple more that are in the yellow here in the mid-2s. Indianapolis Colts come in at 20. Again, this is the composite of Bleacher Report, PFF, Sports Illustrated, CBS Sports. Their offseason ranged between a C+ and a B+, 2.65 on the Check the Mic GPA here. I think that sounds about right for the Colts this offseason.
See, I think that's harsh for the Colts. I think a lot of teams would penalize them because of the departures, right? They lost Ryan Kelly, they lost Will Fries. Like, the reasons you're giving the Vikings credit, you subtract the same credit from the Colts for letting them out of the building in the first place. But again, it's like it's sort of like the Eagles. If you have ready-made in-house replacements, you should be looking to get younger and cheaper rather than pay the big contracts and keep those guys around. Like, that's how you construct good, consistent rosters year after year. So
I was going to say, I think the criticism is more that where were they in the draft GPA when we did this? They had to be in the bottom 10, right? Or maybe they were higher than I expected, and I was saying that. But like Tyler Warren in the first, good player, expected pick. JTT in the second as like a run-stopping defensive end. And I think it was an unexciting draft for them.
I don't think that's why they're ranked as low as they are in these. I think it's the free agency thing and the fact that their net looks negative because of, they lost a couple of offensive linemen. But I think when you factor in, they almost certainly saw that coming, were comfortable with doing it, and were prepared to let it happen to get younger and cheaper. And by the way, those guys that left, Will Fries is dealing with a small sample size of play, and Ryan Kelly's been injured quite a lot. So it's not like they're risk-free. I have no problem with that approach. You could, if you wanted to criticize them for the quarterback situation, okay. But I think bringing in Daniel Jones as like the foil, the competition for Anthony Richardson is probably the right guy to bring in. Number one, it fits within the offense that you want to build for Anthony Richardson in the first place. Like, Daniel Jones, despite looking nothing like Anthony Richardson, actually plays quite a lot like him stylistically. So that part makes sense. I think he's also the right guy to bring in terms of if you can't beat out Daniel Jones, you don't really belong as a starting quarterback, but equally there's upside attached to Daniel Jones that maybe with a good roster and good coaching, he can give you some solid play. So I think that's a positive move for me. Cameron Bynum, Charvarius Ward, those are good additions to the secondary, and a secondary that's changing, evolving in terms of scheme. I think they've had a good offseason.
I thought they'd get more credit for those two moves. Charvarius Ward and Cameron Bynum, two of the best at their respective positions in free agency. They brought in both, as you said, new scheme, new system. They needed, I think, some talent on the back end. I think Ward has consistently been one of the more underrated corners in the league. And I say underrated, I mean, the Niners just paid him a ton and the Colts just paid him a ton, but I'm saying he's been good out there when he's been healthy. So, yeah, I liked those two moves. For me, it's more of the unexciting draft that I wouldn't rank them any higher. I am intrigued by Tyler Warren being added to this offense, though. What he brings to the run game, to the pass game. You could argue they're 4 weapons. I'm not saying they're the most dynamic weapons with Alec Pierce, Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, and Tyler Warren, but that's a really nice top 4, and you throw A.D. Mitchell and whatever he can be in there. I see Laquan Treadwell's on the depth chart too, by the way. Just throwing that out there for you. So, yeah.
The staying ability of former first-round players is remarkable.
I also think when people are ranking the offseasons, I don't think anyone's giving massive credit for Daniel Jones. And the same way I'm talking about the Raiders, this depends on how you're weighing this. If you're saying, hey, we need to figure out who our quarterback of the future is, I don't think you're solving that this offseason by bringing in Daniel Jones. But if you're trying to be more competitive this year, putting Daniel Jones in a competition with Anthony Richardson makes you more competitive this year, because one of two things happens. Either Anthony Richardson has his head on straight and is developed and beats out Daniel Jones for the starting job, or Daniel Jones, as a quarterback with a run threat, steps into probably the best situation of his 6 or 7 year career here. And you could win some games and maybe knock on the door of the playoffs like they did 2 years ago when Gardner Minshew was starting. So if you're trying to get better this year, Daniel Jones probably that addition, whether it's him or Richardson, probably does make you better.
But also, I think you can just stop the sentence earlier. Like, I don't think you're solving who the quarterback of the future is this offseason, period. At which point it's just not it's an unreasonable measuring stick, right? Like, I don't think you can judge them based off theoretically not having an answer at the quarterback position, because none was available to them this offseason that was a workable, realistic solution. So the approach that they've taken, I think, is a smart approach to it, which is, in an ideal world, Anthony Richardson would see off the challenge of Daniel Jones and be the guy going forward, and everything's great. If that doesn't happen and Daniel Jones wins the job, I don't think that's a terrible option for them to have as their starting quarterback this season. And then next offseason, we figure out what we're really going to do with the quarterback position. All that is sound process to me. So that's good. That's a positive to me in their offseason approach. I think the players that they brought in are also good additions. Tyler Warren represents filling the single biggest area of weakness on the roster. So that's a good move as well at the top of the draft. And then I'm not penalizing them hard for letting a couple of offensive linemen walk who each had question marks attached to them, who they dealt without for last season for big parts of it as well. And they had replacements ready to rock. To me, the Colts had a really good offseason. And I think the composite is wrong, and I'm against it.
How high should they? Where would you put them in a blind ranking? Offseason.
I mean, I don't know, top 3rd somewhere, but not like, I don't think they're like top 5, but I think they had a good offseason.
All right, they're number 20 on the composite. Check the mic composite here, trademark. Number 21 is the Tennessee Titans, 2.58 GPA here. They range from a B- to a C+, C+ to a B. To me, the most intriguing decision that the Titans had to make this offseason was, do you select Cam Ward for a team or trade out, right? Like, do you love Cam Ward enough, or do you want to try to get the Bryce Young haul? Because there weren't a ton of QB needy teams this year, but picking at 2 was the Browns, picking at 3 was the Giants. I think the Giants were trying to trade up at some point. And so that's the decision I think that you're weighing if you're the Titans.
And critically, from the read of everybody coming out of the draft, it felt like it was everybody was in for Cam Ward and nobody else, right? Like, yeah, the Giants settled for coming back into the first round for Jackson Dart. Eventually, the Browns stopped the miserable slide of Shedeur Sanders. But like anyone that wanted a quarterback at the top of this draft wanted Cam Ward, and obviously teams had to come to the conclusion it wasn't going to happen. But my point being, if the Titans had decided that the optimal strategy here is to trade out and take the draft haul and try and make the most out of that, they had options. They had a lot of teams that would have been willing to pay to make that happen. Whether I think every team we've mentioned so far would have given them a trade to make that happen. I think you can probably throw in the Saints, at number 9 as well, as a team that might have been willing to do that. They could have gotten a lot for that pick.
The other microscope you want to put on this offseason is they had a massive need at tackle. Coming into the offseason, it was perceived to be right tackle, but they went and signed a left tackle, Dan Moore Jr., and they moved last year's first-round pick, J.C. Latham, to the right side. So in a world where I keep mentioning scarcity at the left tackle position, is it an overpay for Dan Moore? Yes. But do they have creep back toward average potential on the offensive line with Dan Moore coming in, and then the other guy that makes my 53-man roster every offseason? I signed Kevin Zeitler every year until he retired. I will have Kevin Zeitler and Calais Campbell on my team every year. They'd be willing to sign with me until it's retirement time. So Kevin Zeitler, the Lions are going to be next, by the way. Why was the Lions offseason so good last year? Every single need was filled, and one of them was with Kevin Zeitler. Their biggest question mark was right guard last year, the Lions, and they filled him with Zeitler, and he ended up still playing well. So the fact that the Titans added him, he could still play. It's not the long-term answer, but he could still play and maybe gives Cam Ward a better foundation to play with as a rookie. I liked that a lot. So I think they did what they could on the offensive line. I still think they're devoid of playmakers on both sides of the ball. A couple upside picks in the draft. So I thought it was fine. But, it comes down to Cam Ward and Cam Ward versus this hypothetical. What if you had an extra first and a slew of other draft picks to rebuild this roster over the next couple of years?
Yeah, it's that. And I think also I always wonder how people approach kind of grading the expected outcome, right? Like the Jets had this a few years ago, right? Where it's like, oh, look at those players they got. But they had 3 first-round picks. So of course they came away with some good players. You know what I mean? Like how much do you credit Tennessee for simply selecting the top player in the draft at number 1 overall?
So next up is the Lions. Lions are number 22. This is an interesting one because if you were ranking off seasons the last few years, I think they're top 5. But this year you're losing the coordinators. It is the first time, I think I mentioned this on Matt Coller's show, recording with him yesterday. We have been complimenting the Lions for years now. Their process, their draft selections, the way they've complemented their draft foundation with free agents. It's been outstanding. I would say this is the first year after 3 to 4 years of legitimate building blocks after building block after building block, making this team better. This is the first year where you can't say they clearly got better at their positions of need. And that includes coach. Now, that doesn't mean that they won't be just as good. It doesn't mean that they won't even be better. But they come in with more question marks rather than, they came again, last year at this time, could use a defensive tackle. They could use defensive line help. They could use a guard. They could use this. They could use a corner. And they filled all of them, both with free agents and draft picks. And they kept their coordinators. This year, they lose their coordinators. Still maybe don't have edge 2 opposite Aiden Hutchinson. And now with Frank Ragnow's retirement, have question marks at 2 starting spots on the offensive line. So it's the first year in a while where you can't clearly see on paper the Lions getting better based off of their offseason moves.
Yeah, I mean, the coordinators thing, and this is it's not like that's a mistake from them, right? Like there's just nothing you can do about that. In fact, it's inevitable consequence of actually being successful is the good people you have in the building are going to get poached by other teams, and there's not much you can do about that. They'd staved it off for a few years by Ben Johnson coming back for a couple of years, but this year he was gone. Unfortunately for them, Aaron Glenn goes in the same year, and now you're losing both coordinators. So you have to factor that into your offseason grades. Again, not necessarily anything they could do about it, but this is where other teams get credit for bringing in coaches. The Lions kind of have to lose some for losing them both. The personnel thing, though, is a lot more, I think, hit or miss. On the one hand, yeah, they didn't address what we thought was their single biggest need, the lack of another edge rusher opposite Aiden Hutchinson, who, by the way, himself is more of a question mark now that he's coming off a serious injury. It's not, we're hoping Aiden Hutchinson comes back as exactly the same player he left as, but that's not a sure thing anymore. So, it's more important now that you get an extra threat on the edge than it was previously. But you did have a potential glaring weakness, a corner as well. And a guy like DJ Reed was a really astute signing to come in and solve that problem. So they have made some good moves. It's just that they've lost people. They haven't made the move everyone wanted them to make. And as you said, all of a sudden, Frank Ragnar's retirement sort of throws up an extra move that most people, even if the Lions kind of were prepared for it internally, most people were not prepared for that to be a weakness in this team.
I also think this is just where the Lions are in their life cycle, including, like you said, losing coordinators. That's what happens with good teams. You keep having success, you're going to lose coaches, you're going to lose, front office personnel. We've seen the Ravens getting people stolen left and right from their front office, and you keep moving. That's where the Lions are in this life cycle, both personnel and from a front office and coaching perspective, but especially from a personnel perspective. They've drafted so well these last couple of years. There's a lot of money going to homegrown talent in the coming years. It's going to be a lot harder to, flip a third for Carlton Davis to bring him in and pay him $15 million to play starting corner. It's going to be a lot harder to bring in DJ Reader to play defensive tackle. It's just going to be harder to bring in free agents and have feel-good off seasons going forward, other than, hey, they re-signed, Penei Sewell to a big deal. They re-signed Amon-Ra St. Brown. So that next wave of when they re-signed Brian Branch and they re-signed Sam Laporta and they re-sign all their good players, that's going to be the future here for the Lions.
This is what's so compelling, though, about the NFL and the salary cap and all the rules and things associated with it. The draft is like every single situation throws up its own challenges. Like you say the old adage, well, you just build through the draft, right? Just keep drafting well, it's all good. Well, okay, so the Lions knock a draft out of the park, and it's a potentially franchise-altering draft. The first 4 picks we've talked about as being one of the best players at their respective position already. And that's great. That's fantastic, right? You found these 4 young players. They're a part of the core, and they transform everything. But all of a sudden, you then have to start paying. You're only a couple of years away then at that point from having to pay 4 guys at the same time in order to keep them in the building, or make the difficult decision that we love this guy, we selected him, he's one of our own, but there's only so much money to go around, and we got to let 1 or 2 of these guys leave in the offseason, right? You never reach a point where you can do anything with no possible downside attached to it. There's always another shoe to drop. And the Lions have done they've done as good as anybody in the NFL in the last few years, since this regime came in, Brad Holmes, Dan Campbell, of getting as many things correct as possible, right, within the realm of reality. And yet they're still faced with all these absurd challenges that, are difficult to overcome.
Next couple of years, if they're going to re-sign all of them, Aiden Hutchinson, Jamison Williams, Jahmyr Gibbs, Jack Campbell, Brian Branch, and Sam Laporta. Just those 6. If you want to re-sign all of your players. And then I saw the chat mention, hey, Taylor Decker's not getting any younger at left tackle.
Right.
And then you probably can't pay a big-time edge opposite Aiden Hutchinson. So really quick, my quick sidebar here. When you talk about positional value, where do you get your starting tackles? Most of your starting tackles and your best edges are found in the first round. That's why, whether you need them or not, drafting first-round tackles and edges does actually make a lot of sense, because whether you need them or not, 3 years down the road, you might, and you probably need them on the cheap. And so at some point, if you re-sign all those guys, we might be sitting here 2 years from now saying, hey, the Lions really need a left tackle. How are they going to solve this left tackle situation? They still need that edge opposite Aiden Hutchinson. I'm not saying they can't do it. I'm saying these are the challenges that they're facing going forward. By the way, when they're going to pay these very good football players at where we said running back, safety, linebacker, very good football players at perceived lower positions of value.
But think what a percentage of your cap just that little group is, that little cohort of players is that you're going to have to pay in the next couple of years. And that's the reward for doing it the sort of the correct way, right? Building through the draft and, drafting well, like multiple positive things had to happen for you to be in this situation. And that's the reward for it is, oh man, this is a massive problem to have to deal with.
All right. So the Lions, that was a fun discussion. They're at 22, 23. So this is where we start to get in there. This is everybody's under 2.5 GPA here for the rest of the list. Number 23 on the composite GPA. Check the mic. It's the Seattle Seahawks. Another interesting one. They range from a C- to a B. I mean, this honestly comes down to what you think of Geno Smith, Sam Darnold, and then say DK Metcalf and Cooper Kupp. Those are the biggest moves. And then it comes down to like, did they solve their offensive line questions? And I think that's still a fair question for Seattle. Go Gray Zabel in the first round. Did they still do enough on the offensive line? Seattle, another team, I think with a wide range of outcomes this year. I kind of like their roster, but they made some significant moves this offseason, moving from Geno Smith to Sam Darnold.
Yeah, it's tricky because you almost need to be in the building to understand the moves that were made, right? The Geno, it's difficult to paint a picture where the net of Geno Smith and DK Metcalf to Cooper Kupp and Sam Darnold is positive, right? Even if you factor in the money involved, it's difficult to come to the conclusion that that's a net win for the Seahawks this offseason. At which point, the only way it makes any kind of sense or is justifiable is if the relationships were between the team and those players were so toxic that there was no way of resolving it, right? And that was driven on the player side, that like the team didn't piss them off to create this situation, was not a rod of their own back or a rod for their own back. Obviously, we have no way of knowing that from the outside. So you can only really look at this and say, in February, we looked at this team and said, this is a very good team that just needs an interior offensive line fix. And they didn't fix that for a long time into the offseason and created two new completely different problems in the meantime, right? It's like you took a very good team and you got rid of the quarterback and you got rid of its number one wide receiver or number two wide receiver, depending on how you view them. And then you still needed to fix the interior offensive line. So I think that's why you end up with this sort of average, nothing great, is it's just difficult to come away from that feeling great about everything.
I mean, it also depends on what your perspective is on, say, Darnold and Geno Smith. And, oh, by the way, let's throw the DeMarcus Lawrence love in there, one of my favorite offseason signings. Seattle with a sneaky good defensive line. They have loaded up on the defensive line. Leonard Williams coming off of a career year. Byron Murphy heading into year two. DeMarcus Lawrence added to the mix there. Boye Mafe. They've got, I think, a talented and deep defensive line. But you can I've made this argument. Sam Darnold's best season was better than any of Geno Smith's 3 years as starter, the last 3 years. But you've got Geno Smith with 3 years of pretty consistent play. Like, you pretty consistent know what you're getting from Geno Smith, I think, at this point. Where after year one, we were like, let's wait and see. He's coming off being an 8-year backup. So now we're in that mode with Sam Darnold. Let's wait and see. He's coming off being a backup for 4 years. But his season last year was better than, I think, anything Geno Smith put together, at least statistically. And then you add in, well, he had KOC and he had Justin Jefferson. And so maybe that's skewing things a little bit. But you could make the argument that that's a lateral move at quarterback, depending on how you want to weigh maybe Darnold's one season versus Geno's 3. And then you've got, they move on from DK Metcalf. They bring in an older Cooper Kupp. And it looks a little worse, I think, at receiver. But I think they did get better on the defensive line, and they come in with the same questions at offensive line. So why is Seattle here? Every time you say, well, they did this good thing, but there's this other question, and they did this good thing, but there's this other question, and that's what lands you here.
Yeah. I mean, I think they did make some nice moves in the offseason. Like, Gray Zabel is one of my favorite players in the draft. I think that was a fantastic pick and one that we were not sure that they were going to do, given their philosophy in drafting interior offensive linemen early. Nick Emenwari, Elijah Arroyo, Jalen Milroe is a smart addition where they got him in the draft as well. I think they had a nice draft, but it's just hard to feel good about the moves that didn't feel like they needed to be made in terms of the quarterback and the wide receiver thing. Now, maybe they did, right? And that's the thing we don't know is maybe from the outset, maybe from the second Pete Carroll left the building, Geno Smith is like, I am done with this poverty franchise, and there's nothing they can put on the table to make me stay in this hellhole, right? I'm sick of the rain. I want into the desert. Look, I mean, you think that's a coincidence? Rainy all the time in Seattle. Where's he gone? It never rains in Vegas. It's a desert. Maybe that was the case, right? At which point there's nothing John Schneider can do except get what he can for the quarterback and move him on, right? But from the outside, it looks like you voluntarily got a little bit worse at two of the most important positions in the NFL. That doesn't feel like a good offseason.
So they're at 23. Number 24 is the Green Bay Packers, 2.35 GPA for the Packers across the four sources, C- to a B for their offseason. I think around the league, the perception's like, yeah, the Packers didn't really do enough. And this was a year removed from having one of the youngest teams, making it to the final 8, looking like the next team that's like ready to take a step, adding in Xavier McKinney in free agency, adding in Josh Jacobs, 2 guys who hit the ground running and made some big plays. And then this offseason, it's like, well, okay, Aaron Banks at left guard, that's the big move that they make. And they draft Matthew Golden in the first round. I think there's a wide range of opinions on Golden at receiver. But for a team that felt like they needed a wide receiver 1, probably feels like they need an elite pass rusher. Like they need elite players at key positions. Now they have cornerback questions with Jair Alexander out. So all of the high value positions, receiver, say pass rusher, corner, I think they come in with the same questions that they went in with maybe Matthew Golden solves one of those spots because they drafted him in the first round.
Yeah. So that's the thing. These grades, this composite does not include no Jair Alexander. We kind of thought that was done, because this was a thing. The Jair Alexander debate has been all offseason. It's like, well, it sounds like he's going to be gone. And then they went through the draft and they hadn't moved him on. It's like, oh, well, maybe they're going to keep him actually. And then they end up shipping him off anyway. It's like, well, now that makes no sense to me, right? Like I kind of get wanting to move on from him because he's been injured a lot and he is potentially an attitude problem or whatever. I get the idea of we've decided to move on from Jair Alexander in entering an off season. I don't understand not really doing anything to insulate yourself from that in the draft and in free agency. I know they brought in Nate Hobbs, but like they had CB2 as a question as well, right? So Nate Hobbs is not the guy that allows you to move on from Jair Alexander, in my opinion. You don't draft the corner that would allow you to do that, and then you move on from him anyway. That doesn't feel like good process.
Yeah. So look, even if you ask Packers fans, is this a feel-good offseason? I don't think it is. Whereas I think last year probably felt a little bit better. They had some momentum going to the playoffs because you're coming off a year too where they were good. They had a good season, the Packers, but they lost to all the better teams that they played, right? They were losing to the Lions. They lose to the Vikings. They're losing to the teams that are better than them, the Eagles. And did they do enough to compete with the Eagles, the Lions, the Vikings, the best teams in the NFC? It doesn't feel like that on paper unless you get, a great stretch of play from Jordan Love again, or, some development from, I think they like their quarterback room, but yeah, they're just going in with more uncertainty than some other teams.
And I think the Aaron Banks thing is also counting against them a lot as well. Like that felt like a significant overpay. The money, the way it was sort of reported, is not necessarily real. But like the defense, like everyone immediately leapt to the defense of this deal, being like, nah, don't worry. The money's not that much. Nobody defended it literally nobody was out there saying Aaron Banks is just as good a player as this money, right? That's significant, right? When your justification for the move is not, no, you're being unreasonable. He's actually worth the money that was reported. It's not, don't worry, that money was fake. He's actually on a lot less money than that. We can get rid of him pretty quickly. That doesn't say good move.
Yeah, I agree. 25 on the composite here is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Grades are starting to get much lower here, ranging from a D to an A minus, wide range, 2.17 GPA. So Sports Illustrated has an A minus. Bleacher Report goes with a D for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I guess this all comes down to what you think of Aaron Rodgers. Or these may have been out there before he was official. But
it feels like it would have included him, right?
But I still come down to like I don't have. Some of them assume Rodgers. I don't have a great answer for what the Steelers should have done at quarterback. I think that they're in a tough spot other than taking swings. And I go back to 5 years ago. They probably should have started taking swings as Big Ben got older. Yes. But they always the wildest part for the Steelers is the 2 years they've absolutely needed a quarterback has been the year that there's been one or two quarterbacks in the first round. And it was almost one. Again, it was the Kenny Pickett year, and then this year Cam Ward and Jackson Dart. It's not the year where, hey, there's a plethora of QBs, go get one. So I think timing is just off for the Steelers right now, whereas I think the rest of their roster is in pretty good shape.
Right. To an extent, the mistake was already made. It's a previous problem that they're repeating for some reason with the Kenny Pickett problem. So you have to a few teams were in the same bucket this offseason, right? Effectively having no quarterback answer and not necessarily a line of sight to get one in the draft. So you've got to start looking at, okay, Pittsburgh, the Jets, the Giants, and maybe the Saints, if they kind of knew the Derek Carr thing was on the wall. Like you would say those four teams maybe, and the Raiders, if you want to throw them in there before the Geno Smith thing. Let's say 4 or 5 teams were in the same kind of bucket for quarterback problems, right? The one answer to that was Russell Wilson. This is the Giants went with him. The Steelers had him on the roster last year. One answer was Justin Fields. The Jets went with him. The Steelers had him on the roster last year. One answer apparently was Aaron Rodgers. The Jets had him. The Steelers, these teams have all just traded like non-ideal answers at quarterback because none of them had the shot at the guy. So nobody had a better idea of whether Russell Wilson or Justin Fields is a good answer than the Steelers, who had both of them in the building last year. So I don't think you can necessarily criticize them for choosing. Now, maybe you can say they wanted Fields back and he decided to go to the Jets and they could have made a harder push for that. Okay, that's reasonable. But if they decided neither of those guys was really the answer, fair enough. Nobody has a better idea than they are. The problem with that is they then basically box themselves into this world of, well, now you need Aaron Rodgers because the alternative is you have to do the Kenny Pickett thing again and just draft Shedeur Sanders or whatever at your spot in the first round because you need a quarterback. So that's problematic when you allow that to happen, right? You basically have no leverage anymore, and you are desperately hoping that a guy who is, however you want to describe Aaron Rodgers, like a drama queen or, I'm not sure I want to hand that kind of, leverage advantage to somebody like Aaron Rodgers at this point in his career. So that alone doesn't feel good.
And that could go either way. Rodgers, he's hinted at this being his last season. And
he straight up said it pretty much, right?
He said this is pretty much it, right? And like I've said before, when you have a superstar with his back against the wall or like with one more thing to prove, sometimes that works really well. That's Rodgers when they drafted Jordan Love and he, throws 2 MVPs, into the mix there. Or Ray Lewis, the last ride and let's go win the Super Bowl. So this could go really well for the Steelers as well. Like you could get one last hurrah from Aaron Rodgers, try to make a run. And oh, by the way, they're loaded up on draft picks next year. So that's where this, whoever had the A, that's where this works. If it doesn't work, you're sitting there saying like you just wasted a year of a pretty good defense, a decent roster, and you just threw it at this 40-year-old quarterback who's on his way out. And what a waste of a season when we're trying to build for the future. So that's like the two outcomes here for Pittsburgh.
I'm really torn on the Rodgers thing because on the one hand, I think the process was worrying, right? This idea of like, well, we lose out on the other alternative options and we basically paint ourselves into a corner, desperately hoping that Aaron Rodgers eventually decides he's going to be our starting quarterback. That's not good as a general team building construct. However, if you had simply said, let's, fast forward the offseason and go from February to June and say the Steelers starting quarterback is Aaron Rodgers, that's a fun gamble. Like, I get that. I think that's kind of intriguing and I'm all for it. I'm really fascinated to see how it's going to work out. And I think it has a massive range of outcomes from total implosion. Everybody's fired. Finally, Aaron Rodgers is the thing that brings down Mike Tomlin. Those memes of Aaron Rodgers already ended one Steelers Super Bowl hope, and now he's going to end another one. All those things come to fruition. It could also go well. I mean, this is a non-zero outcome for the Steelers, is that Aaron Rodgers and Arthur Smith is a combination that actually, gets the best out of the old version of Aaron Rodgers that currently exists. And this defense plays at a nasty level. And actually the Steelers are legitimately a threat to everybody. I think it's a very fun outcome for this team. I just think the process to get there was very iffy, and I can see why you wouldn't love it.
It also could land it the way everything else has landed, which is like 9-8 and a first round playoff exit. I mean, it could land right in the middle where it's been the last few years for the Steelers. So
the other thing you have to weigh is this, again, it's this sort of weird voluntary, like they bring in DK Metcalf trade and you're like, okay, that's a cool move, especially with Rodgers presumably going to join at some point. And it's like, wow, that combination of Metcalf and Pickens could be exciting. And then you trade away George Pickens for pennies on the dollar to Dallas. And it's like, okay, yeah, you were going to have to pay him, and he maybe he's a pain, and sure, maybe long-term it's the right solution. But for this offseason, it's like you just traded one receiver for another and didn't get any better.
Yeah, that's where I think it's uncomfortable. It's like the half in, half out. If Pickens was still on the roster, it would feel more all in. Not saying that's right or wrong. It would feel more like, hey, you can make a run here with Rodgers. Now you have this massive wide receiver 2 question mark that you came into the offseason with anyway. You just exchanged who the wide receiver 1 actually is. Number 25 on the list, that was the Steelers, was 25. 26 is the Los Angeles Chargers. I'm a little surprised by this because the Chargers are the kings of offseason hype. I don't think they had a bad offseason, but they ranged from a D to a B. I don't think it was a bad offseason. I thought this was one that might more land in the middle. I think a lot depends on their draft as well. Marion Hampton in the first round, Trey Harris, 2 intriguing prospects, a running back in round 1, a receiver coming out of a wide receiver friendly offense, but with an uber production like Trey Harris. I could see both of those guys hitting. But yeah, like there's nothing crazy exciting about the Chargers offseason. I don't think there's anything drastically bad either.
Yeah, it just all feels very reasonably unexciting and not inconsequential, but just nothing to get worked up about. Like departures, you got Joey Bosa, you got Josh Palmer, you've got Christian Fulton. Like these are relatively important players leaving. You got to give them credit for re-signing Khalil Mack. They could have lost both Mack and Bosa in the offseason. So they re-signed Khalil Mack. They bring in Mekhi Becton after his impressive season with the Eagles. That's potentially a decent move. Najee Harris, we thought was the solution at running back, and then they double down and draft Marion Hampton in the first round. Their draft is interesting, but I think some of it is going to be the criticism of like, what did you do to upgrade a receiver, which was the biggest problem.
It's only one. I mean, this is tough because when we were mock drafting for the Chargers in the first round, we're like, man, they could use. They need a playmaker next to Ladd McConkey. They need another pass rusher to future-proof that position. They need defensive tackle help. They needed a lot at key positions. That's part of, I think, the reasoning here. It's only 1 year, but I love the Khalil Mack move. I mean, given some of the money that edge rushers are making, to get another year out of him and buy yourself some time to get his replacement, whether it is Kyle Kennard developing as a mid-round pick, but just buying yourself a year for $18 million, I think that's a really good move for the Chargers. But yeah, I could see it being roster-wise kind of like a lateral move off-season. But they were pretty good last year, and another year with the system. I think they'll be good and competitive once again, but I thought they'd be in the middle of the pack here.
Trey Harris is the exciting draft pick, though. Like his upside, I think, is actually really high. And if he hits this, like that changes a lot for this team.
Next up at 27 overall is the Miami Dolphins, 2.11 GPA for the Dolphins. They had an A from someone at CBS Sports. Everything else was C+ or lower, as low as D+ from Bleacher Report. I think this is part of where Miami, like we've soured on them a little bit, just where they are in their life cycle. And they're coming off of multiple years of go for it moves. Go get Tyreek Hill, go get Jalen Ramsey. And they didn't, when they had those go for it moves, they didn't have a lot of draft picks. So now the roster's worse. There's more holes on the roster, and it's hard to play whack-a-mole on all those, roster holes this offseason. Don't know if the offensive line is where it needs to be. Don't know if defensive tackle's where it needs to be, but they go get Kenneth Grant to try to shore that up. So, yeah, there's a lot more uncertainty, I think, in Miami than coming off of their go-for-it years for the last couple seasons.
Man, how do you get to an A for this offseason? Like, I don't really see that. I mean, they lost Javon Holland, Calais Campbell, Robert Jones. These are all fairly significant losses. Now they bring in James Daniels in the offensive line. Melifonwu, backup Zach Wilson is a fine, reclamation, roll the dice. But like, these are not. I would struggle to say that just that on its own is a net win for them. I love Kenneth Grant, but like, I don't think it was the best draft in the world either. So I don't really see how you get to an A.
Yeah, I don't know why there's an A either. Now, they're another team where I think there's still a decent foundation. When you have Tua and the two receivers, Tyreek Hill coming off of being banged up last year, Jalen Waddle, like this offense can still be explosive. But even if they are, they still probably run into the same issue where they're this second-tier citizen in the AFC and second-tier team behind all the elites, and you're sitting there as you maybe have 9 or 10 wins and you can't get over that hump, and you got the same question marks. So apparently CBS's Ryan Wilson loves the Kenneth Grant pick, which is fine, but as it will be very difficult for him to be as good as Calais Campbell was last year.
Yeah,
I'm not saying right. I'm just saying in like a 1-to-1 rookie Kenneth Grant versus year 15 of Calais Campbell or wherever he is, year 17 of Calais Campbell. Campbell's still good. Like, it's going to be difficult to just replace his production in this year, right? I'm not saying it was the wrong move. I'm just saying for right now.
And this doesn't factor in that Jalen Ramsey is out the door as well. Like, technically, it's not happened yet, right? But this is like a dead relationship that's going to have to move on, which leaves them with one of the worst cornerback rooms in the NFL as well. Like this, again, I don't see how you can love this offseason. I love Kenneth Grant more than almost anybody else in this draft, and yet I can't come close to saying that him on his own is the reason for Miami Dolphins offseason being an A.
So that one I kind of disagree with because I'm on like the low end for the Dolphins right now. The next three who rank low, I disagree with. The next three, Bengals are 28, Browns are 29, Texans are 30. I'm shocked to see the Texans this low. We'll talk about each team, but the Bengals at 2.08 GPA, 28th in the ranking here, C's across the board with PFF giving a C+. I mean, they re-signed Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. The biggest offseason question mark was, do you re-sign T. Higgins? Do you keep the bands together? They did that.
Yeah.
They ticked the first, I think, most important box. Now, there's still other boxes needing to be ticked, but they at least did that, and I think that's a good starting point for the Bengals.
Yeah. So, well, it's weird because, yes, the biggest question was like, are they going to pay money and keep their good players in the house? They did with T. Higgins. They got Jamar Chase redone. Like, those are huge moves. They kept the band together on offense. Then they kind of undermined that by not doing the deal or not doing the business with Trey Hendrickson on the defensive line. And I mean, look, you seem to be, I think you're of the opinion that they can just play hardball and force him to play out the last year of his deal and do it that way. I don't know that that's going to work. And if it doesn't, they need to get him a deal done. And the longer it goes, the more expensive for them it's going to be. Either way, I think that looms over this team at the moment, as does the ridiculous debate they're in with Shamar Stewart at the moment, their first round draft pick. That I can't see any possible defense for. Like, they're just trying to screw him, and he's not going to lose that debate. So
I don't know that that's exactly true. I've heard both sides of it. I think
what's the argument for it?
It's not like unprecedented verbiage. It's just the first time the Bengals have done it with the first rounder.
Because to be clear, what they're trying to do is to allow them to cut him and lose guaranteed money once he's not on the roster.
But it's not like the Bengals are like reinventing verbiage that no other team has ever done. Like, this has happened across the league.
But it's extremely uncommon.
I don't know that that's true. I just don't think it's been in line with maybe where he's been picked or how they handled, say, Amarius Mims and other first rounders in recent years.
As my understanding of it is that is an extremely uncommon thing to happen, certainly for a guy drafted in the first round. So I don't see there's any way they win that standoff, and all they're doing is going like you. On the one hand, you kind of rebuilt credit, and you're like, oh, see, it's different. The Bengals are different. They're paying. They're willing to do things just like everybody else. Joe Burrow has changed this franchise. And then immediately you remove all of that goodwill by nickel and diming 2 other players that you need for this year as well.
Yeah, I mean, the other interesting part is the Bengals. Look, I don't mind them being this low, I guess. I disagree more with the Browns and Texans. We'll talk about that in a second. But
yeah,
I don't mind the Bengals being this low in the offseason. I like that Higgins is back. I don't think we talk about teams not tapping into like every advantage that you can make from a team building standpoint and how you structure contracts. I don't think the Bengals have been leaning into any of that. And then you have the fact that, did they get better on the offensive line? No, that's still a question mark. Now, was the offense still spectacular last year? Absolutely. But they could get better at running the ball in the red zone. We're nitpicking here, but like the offensive line still has questions. And then the defense was not good last year. We've been saying, hey, maybe the coordinator change just helps, but they still have questions rushing the passer. I still wasn't high on Shamar Stewart, whether he's signed or not, as far as solving that. And with just 6 draft picks, 2 of them are linebackers. One of them is this high upside edge who isn't even signed yet. Yeah, it's hard to look at this offseason and say, look at all these reinforcements that were added across the board. There's as many questions probably at this point than there were at the end of the season.
Yeah. I mean, I think I would give them more credit for the T. Higgins and Jamar Chase things, but they are undermining a lot of that with how they're approaching the defensive line now.
All right, number 29 is the Browns, similar GPA, 2.08. And I think this, to me, it comes down to the starting point was horrible, and I think they made good decisions to help get out of it. That's where I'm at with the Browns. They range from D to a B, but I don't think this was a bad offseason for the Browns. I think 3 off seasons ago was bad for the Browns, and that made everything bad for this offseason. The Deshaun Watson move, you can't criticize them for that every year, every offseason, but that is like a triple F move, however you want to rate that, a few years ago. That's still having the residual effect. But I think given that awful starting point, the Browns are doing a decent job of digging themselves out of it now.
I think this is a crazy grading. I think this is utterly ridiculous, in fact. Again, starting point, Myles Garrett demanded a trade. Instead of trading one of the best players in the NFL, they've extended him and got him locked into a new contract, albeit, one of the most expensive contracts in the NFL. But they've gone from their best player wanted at the door to he's happy again. That's good, right? The only criticism you could give them is, I thought drafting where they were, number 2 overall, is a potential gift and a way out of their quarterback hell that, as you so rightly say, they put themselves in with the worst move in NFL history in Deshaun Watson. You can debate how they got there, but they ended up with the quarterback I would have taken at number 2. Like, I would have taken Shedeur Sanders just because I think they need a way out of that. They got him in the 5th round. So they got the same guy, and they're paying him like a fraction of the money they would be paying him if they got him at number 2. And they got an extra roll of the dice, like a bonus lottery ticket with Dylan Gabriel in the 3rd round as well. So, and you can argue that if they didn't think that those 2 guys really had a chance of being that answer, that their process is way better than mine, right? Why? We don't think he's worth this spot, so we're going to trust that that the draft is correct, and we'll let him slide till day 3, and then we'll make a couple of moves and trade down and pick up the extra 1st round pick next year. And as much as Travis Hunter is special, he's unique, he's somebody that hasn't come along for decades. I still think the smart move is to pick up the 1st round pick for next year, if for no other reason than you need the quarterback, not the guy that plays corner or wide receiver.
I mean, this is why I think the Jags-Browns trade was a win-win. In the Jags situation, can one, say, star player make an impact on the team in Jacksonville? I think absolutely, because you have a quarterback, you have a star receiver, you've got some talent on the defensive side. You add one Travis Hunter to the mix there, that moves the needle. In Cleveland, where the entire offensive line is unsigned for next year, you have questions at receiver. Your secondary is unsigned for next year. You have one or two dependable defensive linemen. Is Travis Hunter moving the needle there, or is it Travis Hunter plus Travis Hunter versus Mason Graham plus the 2 extra picks plus next year's first? It was just a better move for the Browns. And to your point, like if we said before the draft, look, they're gonna forget. however you want to care about our quarterback rankings, but they got our number 2 and 4 quarterbacks respectively, and Mason Graham in next year's first round pick, and an extra 2. That's a huge win for me in the draft for the Browns, given their starting point, which was awful and terrible and the worst quarterback contract in history.
Yeah, the other point that I would make that I don't think comes up enough is there is a pretty sizable chance that Mason Graham is a better player than Travis Hunter. Like, I know Travis Hunter is seen of as special and unique, and what if he's able to play wide receiver and like Mason Graham is one of the top 5 players in this draft. You know, if it wasn't for some weird measurements like shorter than ideal arms and he weighed in 20 pounds lower than he was supposed to, like his tape says he's the top 5 player in this draft. They may have gotten the better player in addition to the first round draft pick as well. Like, there's a sizable chance that that is the case. Maybe not the most likely case, but a sizable chance that they got the better player in addition to a first round draft pick next year. I think this is pure hate for the Browns for no particularly good reason. I think they've done a good job overall, given some challenging circumstances.
That's it. They started, look, you can nitpick some of the draft picks. Fine. I would do that. They started digging this year. They started digging themselves out of this terrible hole. I think that's a good offseason for the Browns, given their awful starting point and what we saw from Deshaun Watson last year. Number 30 is the Houston Texans. I don't understand why the Texans are so low, but their grades range from a D to a B minus. D for PFF, B minus for CBS Sports. Is this just Tunsil going out the door? I mean, I thought vibes were on the other end for Houston.
I bet that's a big part of PFF's is the Tunsil thing.
Yeah, and I get it, but honestly, like I could see if the equation, and this is where you could call it a win-win. The equation for the Texans, I forget the exact draft picks, but I can have Laramie Tunsil or these extra draft picks, and we think we're going to get Cam Robinson on a 1-year deal to kind of stitch it together. And so Cam Robinson's not as good as Laramie Tunsil, but with the extra draft capital, that's great. I think that's fine. But also from the Commanders' situation, it's like, yeah, we're going to get an established left tackle. We're willing to do that. I thought it was a win-win trade for both teams for where they are.
I mean, yeah.
I liked the Texans draft at the top. I liked their trade down out of the first round and getting the 2 Iowa State receivers. So, and then you got to add in the coaching stuff. No offense to our friend Bobby. Maybe that's why PFF hated it. But things weren't going well last year. And I think that team's talented enough that the offense looks better this year.
I think the big criticism for people, evaluating their offseason or hating their offseason would be they had the worst offensive line in the NFL last season, and it doesn't look better at the moment on paper necessarily, right?
Yeah, I think and that's where like the context for me is I don't think they looked bad because they were bad at one-on-one blocking. You know what I mean? The stuff that shows up in, say, PFF grades or whatever. Kenyon Green, absolutely. There was a point where I think he was the biggest weakness and the dude couldn't block anybody, and it was awful. And then there was other times they just didn't know what they were doing. So that's my assumption. My assumption is that they're going to be coached up a little bit better, handling stunts and blitzes better, and it's not a massive personnel issue. It's are they prepared and ready to go issue.
And I think you have to view the Tunsil thing the same way as, from Washington's perspective. Like, yes, it's unquestionably a massive on-field downgrade to go from Laramie Tunsil, particularly as a pass blocker, to Cam Robinson or, the rookie Arante Ursary if they go with him. But it is remarkable, like the universal happiness that anyone connected with the Texans had at getting that guy out of the building, right? People did not think that he was a net positive for this team, despite like objectively being an elite pass blocking tackle. It would be unusual if all of those people were absolutely full of it and crazy. And, this is actually a catastrophe. There's probably something to that. I don't know how much it is. And maybe it isn't enough to offset how good he is as a pass blocker, but it's definitely a factor that people probably aren't considering enough when you're just looking at Tunsil versus Cam Robinson.
Yeah, look, I was high on the Texans going into last year, and we probably would have ranked them as a high offseason because it was Donnell Hunter, Stephon Diggs. Like, there were big splashy moves that probably ranked really high in offseason grades. I'm just as high on the Texans heading into this year as I was last year. I'm not saying they're going to beat the Chiefs, Bills, Ravens, the best teams in the AFC. But if they lose in the divisional round, similarly, I wouldn't be surprised. Also wouldn't be surprised if they did sneak an upset against one of those teams. So I'm just as high on the Texans this offseason. So I'd at least have them in the middle, but certainly not third worst here. The last two kind of make sense. Vibes aren't great, I don't think, in either spot. The 49ers being at number 31 just felt inevitable because they had superstars across the board, and Brock Purdy, could barely even make his own ramen noodles on his salary. So, just kidding. Brock Purdy got paid this offseason. That's part of the process. This was inevitable. It would be really difficult for the Niners to rank high in offseason grades, right? Wouldn't it be very difficult in a year where they had to pay Brock Purdy, and almost certainly you knew that some established players were going to be going out the door?
Yeah, I mean, well, particularly if they didn't make a lot of moves either, right? So it's not like you could even talk yourself into the net of some of these new additions being worth it. It's like they lost, they traded away Deebo Samuel, they lost Aaron Banks, Charvarius Ward, Dre Greenlaw, Hufanga, Javon Hargrave. Like, they lost a lot of people this offseason, and actively traded some of them away, and didn't bring much in the way of supplementing that. Now, all of that is now focused on the draft. So Leonard Floyd as well, right? It was another one that they lost a lot of guys, right? And yeah, okay, they re-signed Brock Purdy. And actually, I would give them credit for that contract coming in at a dollar value lower than I think it could and maybe should have. So that's almost, I think they win that. But they didn't do anything really in free agency to boost them. So it all comes down to, did you like their draft or not? And I didn't love their draft. So it's tough to give them too much of a grade.
And I've called it one of the most important drafts because they had so many defensive line needs. And now you have first rounder Mykel Williams. You've got Alfred Collins at defensive tackle, CJ West at defensive tackle. Like, you're expecting those guys to step in and play. So that's part of this as well. The best teams, like when we talked about the Bills, it's like, all right, their first rounder is probably going to play. And then everyone else is, icing on the top of the cake. If they contribute this year, great. We're building for the future. That's where those are good vibe off seasons, is when the draft picks feel like additions to a deep team. With the Niners, it's like, man, these guys better all contribute. Just like the last two draft classes, those guys better take a step forward here if we're going to be good again. So just where the Niners, to me, it's just a life cycle thing where they are. And I didn't love their draft either, but if they hit on a few of those players, I think, they bounce back easily from a 6-win season last year. We're going to be sleeping on the Niners because of this offseason not being great, but their foundation is still very strong, even with Deebo Samuel leaving.
Agreed. Yeah. The two best things they did, I think, was they got a good deal on the Brock Purdy contract relative to how painful that could have been. And they brought back Robert Saleh, who's been, he was the architect of the best defense they had. And I think has still absolutely got chops on the defensive side. And now they need him because they got a lot of young guys that need to be coached up fast.
Buy low on Bryce Huff, with Saleh, right? That could pay off pretty well there. Like, there's a world where Nick Bosa, Mykel Williams, and Bryce Huff looks like a pretty good trio.
Huff's a nice
right now, it's uncertain. Yes. And buy low on, they finally get Mac Jones in the building. Finally get to go back to the Mac Jones well from 2021. All right, number 32, the team that is expected to, I think the favorite to be picking number 1 overall next year, New Orleans Saints, with the lowest rated offseason in the composite. C- is the highest, a couple D- is there for the Saints. Uncertainty up and down the roster. Tyler Shuck, a 40-year-old rookie quarterback or whatever he is. I keep going back between 25 and 26. I forget the exact number. But I rounded up to 40 for this one.
Yeah.
So the Saints are last because the vibes are low. Derek Carr retired this offseason. There's just, more question marks on this roster than any other in the NFL.
Yeah. I mean, it is like they felt like the team the most at the, without a quarterback when the music stopped again, to use that analogy. Like, and it almost felt like it was made worse by the Carr sort of thing. It felt surprising, though. I don't know if it was for them. Like, but they went from Derek Carr as your quarterback, and that's not a terrible situation to be in, to actually now you have the most depressing quarterback training camp battle of all time in 40-year-old, apparently, Tyler Shook, rookie, and then Spencer Rattler, and then Jake Hayner. Like, this is just whoever wins, it's awful. So yeah, it doesn't feel good for the Saints, but I think it's more the reflection of just like where they are as a franchise right now. They're in pain. Like they're in a bad spot. I don't know that you look at this and say overall again, judging by process, judging by what position were you in when you had to make all these moves. I don't know if they've done a terrible job this offseason. Like, quarterback was going to suck, whatever, right? They didn't have a shot at Cam Ward, so they were in the same boat as everybody else, which is, do we draft a guy right at the top, or do we try and do something a little unconventional? They've decided Tyler Shough is the best, the most likely of that second wave of quarterbacks to do anything. And I mean, who's to say they're wrong necessarily? They re-signed Chase Young. I think that was good business. They re-signed Juwan Johnson. I think that was good business. They've lost a couple of guys in free agency, but nobody that I would be panicking about. Their draft, I think, other than, Tyler Shough being the guy that they need to work out, Kelvin Banks in the first round, I think, is smart. And, everyone thought they were going to draft the quarterback at 9, right? But would you think that this was a better offseason if they drafted Shedeur Sanders at 9 and had someone random in the second round? No, so I don't think you can kill them for that.
I'm at the point where I'm kind of glad. If I'm a Saints fan, I'm glad that they don't rank higher in the offseason, because that would probably mean that they're quadrupling down and signing all these free agents that they can't afford. And I thought months ago, you and Jason Fitzgerald, like when they started trading Marshawn Lattimore and look into the future, you and Jason Fitzgerald of Over the Cap had a really good breakdown of where the Saints are. And you hinted at it, life cycle. This is where they are. The same thing I said about the Niners. This is just where they are as a franchise. So they're going to rank low on these lists because they're one of the least talented teams in the NFL right now. And if you didn't love their draft, then you're probably not going to love their offseason, because, again, more going out the door than coming in. But the guys that came in the door, I agree. Like Chase Young, yeah, that's good value for a couple of years given the edge market and where he is as a player. So it's just where the Saints are. I don't think it's going to feel great for a while. They have to get younger, and they have to hit on these draft picks. But they're getting out of the cap misery that they've been in the last couple of years, and it's a part of the rebuild.
It's also another example, I think, though, of how like the standard across the league has been raised, and like the Saints apparently had the worst offseason of any football team in the league this year. And I don't think it was bad. Like, I don't think this is a catastrophe. Obviously, the fact that they don't have the situation is bad. The fact that they don't have a starting quarterback and they have one of the most depressing camp battles of all time, that's bad, right? But given what they were dealt with going into this offseason, I don't think that their process was horrific. And the last 5 teams you just rattled off, a couple of those, I think the Browns had a good offseason, actually, not even a bad one. And we've debated the other teams. I think, again, it's just another example of the floor has been raised. Nobody is a catastrophe anymore. There is no joke of a franchise fumbling around in the dark in free agency and the draft, having absurd left field day 3 picks drafted in the top of the second round. Nobody's doing that anymore. Everyone has gotten good at this. And so, yeah, if you're grading the entire league on a curve and somebody's got to have an A and somebody's got to have an F, then yeah, the Saints may be the bottom team on the totem pole. But I don't think that this is I don't think that this is the way it used to be, where there were genuinely embarrassing franchises year on year.
Yeah, but as long as there's zero-sum game, you either win or lose your games. It's not all going to show up, right? We're going to, you're going to feel good about 25 out of 32 teams going into the season, but somebody has to lose, right? So
right. And look, Sports Debate Arena in the chat is saying passing up Sanders in the second round for Tyler Shough is horrific process. I would take Shedeur Sanders in the second round way before I took Tyler Shough, but you can't ignore the fact that 32 teams said the opposite. 32 teams let Shedeur Sanders fall way further than that. And you can't dismiss that as an inconsequential piece of information.
But that's also because we were missing a lot of the off-field information, the interviews. We were missing a lot of that information going forward. And let's just, I want to remind our smart listeners, the one thing you shouldn't be overly confident in is your own quarterback opinions. You just shouldn't. And no, I don't think anyone should. And so I think the smart thing is to have less confidence in those opinions and take more swings, which is why I think taking Shedeur Sanders and Dylan Gabriel is good process.
And by the way,
going all in on one guy and saying, I know exactly what I'm going to get isn't smart, because we've seen all the failures. And we've seen all the fail on both ends, right? Guy you didn't love is good. Guy that you did love is not good. It's too risky to go all in on just one opinion.
It's also not as simple as I just made it sound, which is, 32 NFL teams believe that Shedeur Sanders was at best a 5th-round draft pick, because there's only so many teams had an opening as a starter. And then once those guys go somewhere else, the math changes, right? Not everybody is looking for a potential headache to be a backup, to be a 3rd-string quarterback. So it's entirely conceivable that other teams ranked him or graded him higher than that, but didn't have the need or didn't want the headache to deal with, et cetera, et cetera. My point being, just because you think he's better doesn't mean that you can say, well, it's a terrible process to have Tyler Shough ahead, right? I think Shedeur Sanders was a better quarterback, and I think the gamble is worth it, that I would take him higher than that, and I would go with that. But somebody else saying, I believe Tyler Shough is that guy over Sanders, I mean, all right, it's not so crazy that I'm like, that's a joke of a process that you've come to that conclusion. You need to blow up your entire, system and start over. Like, it's just, I understand how you could come to that conclusion.
And when we talk process, look, if I said, the Jets had terrible process by going to get Aaron Rodgers, look how it didn't work out, I thought the process was fine.
Yeah.
It didn't work out, and now they're in the same boat that they were 2 years ago without a quarterback. They took a shot, it didn't work out, and you take a shot again and try again. So here we are. Anyway, good show. Last live one for a couple weeks here. Appreciate all the interaction. Appreciate the chat. Appreciate all the new subscribers this offseason. We're going to hit a bit of a break here on Check the Mic. We're just taking next week off, so no live shows next week. The following week, though, the week after 4th of July, we will have a few shows up here, a couple pre-recorded shows, and then back live in a couple weeks again. Don't forget, hit the subscribe button. Still have a ton of content coming out, but we're going to give our producers, social team, interns, Sam, give everybody a little bit of a break here, and then recharge the batteries, as they say, and then come back strong mid-July with some more live shows, and then late July into the studio. And I think you're going to like it. I think it's going to be fun with the new look studio and having our own place here, Sam.
Yeah. So we're going to be working on that as it is. We have the room, right? So for the longest time here, they were renovating the entire building, and that was the thing that's the big holdup. We now have access to our own studio right now. We've got the key to the building. We've got the code into the door. We can get into our studio at any time. Right. The problem is that right now the only thing in there is like a desk and a bunch of sound deadening panels. So that's the thing that we need to work on. We've got equipment that's arriving. We've got stuff that we're setting up. I've got paint that I have to lash on the walls. There's all kinds of stuff happening. So yeah, the studio is on the way, and it should. We're hoping it's going to look cool when we're finished with it. The other thing though is
I'm leaving town.
Button. We're at 48,000. We're chasing 50. Yeah. Let's go.
We want 50. Can we get 50 by the time the studio's open? Can we get to 50,000 by the time the studio's open? I think that's a worthy goal. I'm leaving town as you're doing all the DIY stuff because I'm just useless. I'm not helpful.
Yeah, for the best.
I took some measurements. I did my part. You make it look good without me. I'm leaving town.
I will say though, maybe the one area where you would have some use is in painting, because you're inherently longer than I am.
Well, we'll see. Help any way I can. All right. Well, it's been fun. Good show. We're not going anywhere, but just like a week off. That it for today?
Yeah.
Thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll see you again on Monday after 4th of July, whatever day that is. Enjoy 4th of July. Happy birthday, America. We'll see you after 4th of July right here. Check the mic.